Chapter 152. Guards, drag him out and behead him. Hearing Li Yi's words, the court fell into dead silence. County Magistrate Lu took advantage of the break to take a sip of tea, but he spat it all out in an instant. He turned his head abruptly and stared at Li Yi with wide eyes. Doubts, astonishment, shock. All kinds of emotions emerged in his eyes. Behead him? What gave him the confidence to say such a thing? Even the county magistrate or the magistrate didn't have the right to approve the death penalty, let alone a county lieutenant. In order to prevent indiscriminate killing, according to the law of the Jing Kingdom, the application for the death penalty should be reported to the higher levels and reviewed by the Ministry of Penalty many times. Finally, it should be signed by the emperor himself and then beheaded. How could it be so simple? Even if his identity was as he thought, he didn't have the right to give such an order. However, seeing that he said, drag him out and behead him, so easily with a gloomy face, County Magistrate Lu increasingly felt that his background was unfathomable. County Magistrate Lu was like this, not to mention the yamen runners in the court. When the young county lieutenant opened his mouth, they were a little confused. Repeating words and raising his voice meant that he was lying? Rubbing his nose meant that he was trying to cover up the truth? Rubbing his thumb meant that he was flustered? This method of solving a case was simply unheard of. What was more unbelievable was that he looked shifty-eyed and ugly, which meant that he was not a good person. Since when was being ugly a crime? Could this county lieutenant be more sloppy in solving a case? What the county lieutenant said next confirmed their guess. It was really possible. Drag him out and behead him? Behead him? The yamen runners smiled bitterly in their hearts. You're just a county lieutenant, not the emperor. Who gave you such a great power? Li Xian's mouth twitched mockingly when he saw the shocked expressions on everyone's faces. They were just a bunch of country bumpkins who hadn't seen the world before. Just a few words had scared them. After all, the person standing in front of them was a freak who could turn right into wrong, black into white, and the ground under his feet into a ball. A single sentence from him could make people doubt their lives. Compared to this, what did what they had just said count for? Having known Li Yi for such a long time, Li Xian had already deeply understood that there was no need to doubt anything he said. If you think what he said is wrong, there is only one possibility, and that is that you are not smart enough. In other words, his IQ was not high enough. He had just learned the word IQ from Li Yi not long ago. At this moment, the young man kneeling on the ground was dumbfounded. Beheaded, beheaded. He raised his head and glanced at the young man who had just spoken. He saw that the young man's face was serious and did not look like he was joking. He suddenly felt his vision go black and instantly collapsed to the ground. Even Wang Er, who was standing beside him, was stunned when he heard this. Was this lord serious? In the next moment, a miserable scream came from the court. Lord, please spare my life, please spare my life. The young man got up from the ground and kowtowed as if he was pounding garlic. It's all my fault. I was greedy for money. That day I accidentally saw the place where the master hid the silver, so I had an evil intention. Yesterday when the master was not here, I stole the silver. Now I've buried it under the third peach tree in the backyard. I'm willing to confess everything. Lord, please spare my life. This young man was just a lowly servant. How would he know about the twists and turns of criminal law? When he heard the words, drag him out and behead him, he was completely dumbfounded. How would he dare to deny it? What was a few dozen taels of silver? If this went on, he would lose his life. It was just a few dozen taels of silver. Was it worth it? The court continued to be silent. All the yamen runners could not help cursing in their hearts. How could it work like this? County Magistrate Lu was also extremely shocked. Glancing at Li Yi, who had recovered his calm expression, he could not figure out whether it was a fluke or a plan. If it was the latter, he would have to re-examine this county magistrate Li. The reason was that Li Yi's official position was only obtained by his background, and he would at most be a muddle-headed county magistrate. Now it seemed that he had underestimated him. Seeing the young man kowtowing as if he was pounding garlic, Li Yi felt a little bored. A few days ago, when he was basking in the sun in the yard, he read a few leisure books, such as How to Recognize Microexpressions, The Secret of Microexpressions, The FBI Teaches You to Read Minds, and so on. Originally, he was just looking for novelty, but he did not expect it to be useful here. He had thought that this young man could hold on for a while, but he did not expect that he would confess so soon. At this time the Yamen runner's eyes on Li Yi had changed dramatically. No one thought that this young county magistrate was just a good-looking but useless embroidered pillow. Most of them were constables and their daily duty was to chase down criminals and catch thieves. County Magistrate Zhou was lazy, so he would ask them to help with some trivial cases, and they were also good at interrogating cases by torture. This county magistrate Li was observant, and he could even notice such details as rubbing his nose and rubbing his thumb. Although they were not clear about the meaning of the actions that County Magistrate Li had just said, they were already 70% convinced after seeing the young man confess. Then he convicted him with ugliness to disturb his mind, and the sentence, drag him out and behead him. What's more, it was a stroke of genius that made the criminal's mind completely collapse, and he confessed to the theft. Based on this alone, it could be seen that he was more powerful than County Magistrate Zhou. This young county magistrate was not simple. Hey, why did you say those things just now? Li Xian returned to his curious nature and he asked, not caring that they were in the court. He was really curious about how Li Yi guessed that person's mind through these subtle movements. If he could learn this trick, wouldn't he be able to see through people's mind easily in the future? Not only Li Yi but all the people present were curious about this question at this moment. In an instant more than 10 pairs of eyes looked over. Even County Magistrate Lu was no exception. Li Yi turned to look at Li Xian. Do you really want to know? Li Xian looked at him with a faint smile and his heart skipped a beat. He suddenly had a bad feeling. He recalled that every time Li Yi subverted his understanding, it made him doubt the world and he could not eat or sleep well. Only by experiencing it himself could he understand the feeling. Let's talk about this in a few days. Li Xian's face turned pale and he hurriedly shook his head and said. Thinking of those terrible experiences, the curiosity in his heart was instantly reduced by more than half. Li Yi did not explain and the Yamen runners were very disappointed. Even though County Magistrate Lu was also curious, it was not appropriate to ask at this moment. He waved his hand and some Yamen runners already understood and took the young man who stole the silver away. After the case was solved, before County Magistrate Lu had time to breathe a sigh of relief, a Yamen runner came from outside the door and whispered something in his ear. Lord Lu, about the arson case, shopkeeper Wu came to urge us again. Hearing that, County Magistrate Lu rubbed the area between his eyebrows and sighed in his heart. When would such days come to an end? County Magistrate Lu's eyes suddenly lit up when he glanced at County Magistrate Li. Chapter 153. County Magistrate Lu tidied up his official robe, cleared his throat and walked to Li Yi saying with a smile, County Magistrate Li, I really admire you for solving the case so well. If today's event is spread out, I'm afraid that our Anxi County will be much more peaceful. County Magistrate Lu was not sure about Li Yi's character when he met him for the second time. However, as long as one was a human being, he would like to listen to flattery. A flattery could always shorten the distance between them. Lord Lu, you flatter me. After all, County Magistrate Lu was his superior, so Li Yi couldn't always put on airs. Therefore he cupped his hands with a smile and said very modestly. County Magistrate Lu was a bit flattered when he suddenly showed a smile. He thought that County Magistrate Li didn't seem to be like those rich playboys, so he couldn't help but feel slightly happy and said, there is still an important case to be solved. If County Magistrate Li has nothing to do, why don't you sit down and continue to watch? You can also give me some advice when necessary. County Magistrate Lu's words were very polite. If the person in front of him was County Magistrate Zhou, he would probably casually say, Old Zhou, I have something important to deal with. This case will be handed over to you. You are not allowed to go home for dinner if you don't finish the sentence. Then he would go to the back hall to taste tea and have fun with his concubine. He had been a county magistrate for so many years, and this period was the most aggrieved time for him. Fortunately, Li Yi was not an insensible person. In the future they would meet each other frequently in the same county government, so he had to build a good relationship with County Magistrate Lu. After all, nominally, County Magistrate Lu was the boss here. This is my duty. It's good for me to get familiar with it in advance. If I can help you, it will be better. Li Yi smiled and sat on his seat again. County Magistrate Lu nodded and felt very comforted. Then he sat back in the hall and slammed the gavel again. Bring the criminal. The young prince, Li Xian, who was sitting next to Li Yi, turned his head to look at him from time to time. He really wanted to learn how to read people's minds, but he was worried that if Li Yi opened his mouth he would suffer for a few days again. He was in a dilemma. At this time, Li Yi's heart was depressed. A few days ago he had read a lot of books on microexpressions and FBI investigation, and now he had to use them so soon. Could it be that all of this was predestined? A moment later, a middle-aged man was escorted into the hall. After he was asked to kneel in the hall, he announced loudly, "Sir, the criminal is here." County Magistrate Liu slammed the gavel and said loudly, "Zhao Fong, County Magistrate Liu, Magistrate Liu, Magistrate Liu, I'm asking you again." Magistrate Fong, Magistrate Liu is Magistrate Liu. Half a month ago, the splendid cloth shop in the city was burned down. Although there were no casualties, all the cloth in the shop was burned. Shopkeeper Wu, the owner of the shop, suffered a heavy loss. After many investigations, the suspect was finally identified as the shopkeeper of another shop not far from the splendid cloth shop. The two shops were not far from each other, so they naturally had a competitive relationship. Not long ago, the splendid cloth shop developed a new type of cloth that was very popular in Qingyan Prefecture. The shop's doorstep was almost trampled flat by customers. The other shop was naturally deserted. They watched as someone else made a fortune. Their feelings were probably no different from Magistrate Liu, who saw Magistrate Zhou suddenly become the magistrate. Jealousy was a scary thing. They were both cloth sellers. Why did your shop's business have to be better than mine? Furthermore, the two of them had quite a bit of personal grudge between them. Thus, on a quiet, moonless night, shopkeeper Zhao stealthily came to the entrance of the splendid cloth shop and set it on fire. Then he also set it on fire. Shopkeeper Zhao was set on fire, but Magistrate Liu was worried. This case was neither big nor small. Logically speaking, both of them were merchants with low status. Magistrate Liu did not have to worry about handling this case. However, the shopkeeper of the splendid cloth shop was the judge. In this case, Magistrate Liu had to consider it carefully. Although Zhao Fong was the most suspicious, the evidence was not conclusive. Some heavy punishments, non-murder cases or other serious cases could not be used. If such torture tools were to be used, they must be reported to their superiors and the brand must be verified. Moreover, they could not use it on the same criminal more than twice. Otherwise, it would be considered torture to extort a confession. A few days ago, His Excellency had personally sent someone to the county yamen to inform them that the court meeting was approaching. This was also the time when the imperial censors were most active. These censors had nothing to do, so they wandered the streets and learned about the government from the commoners. They wanted to get hold of the officials' weaknesses. If they used torture improperly and were labeled as cruel officials, it would damage His Excellency's achievements. Then, as the county magistrate, he would not have a good time next year. "Your Excellency, I'm innocent," Zhao Fong said unhurriedly. "I didn't set the fire, I'm innocent." The result was the same as before. Magistrate Liu was enraged when he saw Zhao Fong's calm expression. He snapped, "How dare you? Do you really think I don't dare to use torture on you?" Zhao Fong knelt in front of the court and remained silent. He thought to himself, so what if I have to torture him? It's nothing to suffer a little pain. However, if I'm convicted of arson, I'll be punished severely. Magistrate Liu picked up a red stick and was about to throw it at Zhao Fong. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. He immediately waved his hand and the stick fell to the ground. He then said coldly, "The criminal Zhao Fong set the fire without any reason. The evidence is conclusive, but he still dares to deny it. Men, drag him out and behead him." The runners were startled when they heard the explanation. They glanced at Magistrate Liu, then at Li Yi. The magistrate was applying what he had learned on the spot. Li Xian curled his lips. It was interesting to see something like this happen the first time, but it was boring the second time. Li Yi was startled too, but he found the magistrate to be interesting. Zhao Fong's expression changed when he heard the words "drag him out and behead him." He was about to say something, but when he raised his head and saw the expressions on the runners' faces, his heart skipped a beat. He knew that the magistrate was trying to intimidate him. A magistrate did not have the authority to decide the life and death of a person. He straightened his body and said in a clear voice, "Sir, even if you behead me, I didn't set the fire." His attitude was as if he had been wronged and would rather die than surrender. Magistrate Lu's expression froze. He was startled for a moment before he could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. Why did the same trick work so well when County Magistrate Li used it just now? Why did the man kowtow and confess? But it didn't work at all when it came to him? Is he looking down on me, Magistrate Lu? Magistrate Lu became even more furious when he saw the runners around him could not help but laugh. Just as he was about to execute the punishment, Magistrate Li slowly rose from his seat and brought his fists together before he said, "A human life is at stake. Sir, I'm afraid it's inappropriate." Chapter 154. County Magistrate Lu was overjoyed after being interrupted by Li Yi. He had really lost his mind due to Zhao Feng's anger. If he were to throw a stick at him, it would be fine if he was the one who started the fire, but if he were to blame the wrong person, there would be a bunch of imperial censors waiting for him. Perhaps because of such a small matter, His Majesty happened to be in a bad mood and he, County Magistrate Lu, would have to pack up and leave. What do you think, County Magistrate Li? County Magistrate Lu withdrew his hand from the stick and said with a smile, "A human life is more important than anything else. Everyone only has one life, so we shouldn't make a rash decision." Li Yi rose from his chair and said. Zhao Feng was overjoyed hearing this. The young man's words were extremely reasonable. It would be best if he could be exempted from the punishment too. "You're right, County Magistrate Li." County Magistrate Lu nodded with a confused look as he had no idea what Li Yi was trying to say. "I've heard of a punishment called the ant punishment. It involves stripping the criminal's clothes and smearing honey all over his body, before placing a few ant nests next to the criminal. The ants are fond of sweetness, thus they would crawl all over the criminal's body. Even if they were bitten, they would not leave any wounds. Why don't you try it?" Li Yi said with a smile, but in the eyes of the bailiffs his smile looked like that of a devil. The mere thought of the scene made them feel uncomfortable, as if countless ants were crawling all over their bodies. Some of them even reached out their hands to grab the ants. Li Xian's eyes were filled with terror too. The scene described by Li Yi was too intense, causing him to subconsciously glance at the ground. When he saw a few ants crawling under his feet, he immediately raised his legs and moved away from them. County Magistrate Lu secretly swallowed his saliva, causing goosebumps to rise on his skin as he recalled a certain scene. Ant punishment? After hearing the young man's words, Zhao Feng, who was kneeling on the ground, could not help but shiver as cold sweat ran down his back. What he hated the most in his life was to see things that were densely packed together. Just the thought of ants crawling all over his body made him feel worse than death. His body no longer had the strength to support itself and he collapsed on the floor. "My lord, this lowly one has confessed, this lowly one has confessed, this lowly one was the one who started the fire, this lowly one was the one who started it." Frightened by a certain scene in his mind, shopkeeper Zhao collapsed to the ground. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with terror. Even his voice was weak. Looking at that guy lying there like a pile of mud, Li Yi was a little surprised. "This is just an ordinary ant. Don't you see those reality TV games in the future? A cute girl dares to crawl into a box full of snakes, insects, rats and ants all by herself. Compared to that, what does this count as?" Looking at this fellow's face that was as pale as a piece of paper, he looked like he was about to die from fright. Did he have a phobia of ants? The mud-like shopkeeper Zhao was dragged away. The bailiffs looked at Li Yi with admiration. They looked at each other and suddenly bowed at the same time. "County Lieutenant is mighty." By now, they had put away all the contempt in their hearts for this young county lieutenant. There was no need for torture, no need to extort a confession. Just a few words were enough to make a suspect confess to his crimes. Not to mention the Anxi County Yamen, even in the entire Qing'an Prefecture or even the entire Jing state, who could do this? Following such a county lieutenant, would there be any case they couldn't solve in the future? Even before he officially took office, Li Yi had already convinced all the bailiffs based on what happened today. Of course, County Magistrate Lu was also convinced. After witnessing County Lieutenant Li's ability with his own eyes, he would be much more at ease about the security of the county in the future. Previously, he was worried that His Majesty would force a playboy from the royal family into the county government, but now this worry was completely dispelled. Li Yi didn't come to the county government to solve cases. Since County Magistrate Lu said he could have a month's vacation, Wouldn't it be a waste of the good intentions of the imperial court if he came to work so early? After exchanging greetings with County Magistrate Lu, Li Yi took the opportunity to say goodbye, ready to enjoy his 1 month's vacation. County Magistrate Lu said with a smile that he didn't need to hurry to take office. Although it was against his will, he could only work hard for a month at most, which was far less important than selling a favor to County Lieutenant Li. Phew, I'm finally out. In a room in the county government, a young man pushed the door open and came out, letting out a long sigh of relief. After being inexplicably grounded by his father for so long, the young man surnamed Lu was in a good mood today as he could finally come out for a breath of fresh air. Recently, there was something wrong with his father, who was always venting his anger on him for no reason. The young man surnamed Lu decided to stay far away from his father when he saw him, lest he got into trouble again. When he came out from the back office, he happened to see a person coming out from the front hall. The moment he saw the young scholar, a trace of astonishment appeared on the young man surnamed Lu's face, followed by ecstasy. There was a way to heaven, but you didn't take it but broke into hell. Unexpectedly, he met this guy in the county government who had ruined his plan and beat him up. Could it be that this guy had been sued? Haha. The young man surnamed Lu laughed wildly, strode over, pointed at the scholar and said sarcastically, "You didn't expect that one day you would fall into my hands, did you?" Seeing that the scholar was stunned as if he was scared, the young man surnamed Lu felt even more comfortable. When he was about to call for a servant, he suddenly heard an extremely gloomy voice. "Fall into whose hands?" A foot wearing an official's boot suddenly poked out from the hall. The youth surnamed Lu, who was standing at the door, was not prepared and was kicked in the buttocks. He staggered and almost fell down the corridor. After he steadied himself, he turned his head and roared, "Which son of a bitch dares to kick me? Dad." The young man surnamed Lu's face turned pale and he was scared out of his wits. "Unfilial son, what did you just say?" County Magistrate Lu's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and he said in a cold voice, "Dad, I don't know." The young man surnamed Lu's voice trembled. Before he finished speaking, County Magistrate Lu waved his hand and ordered a servant, "Take this unfilial son back to his room and put him in confinement for 3 months. He is not allowed to step out of the room without my permission." Hearing this, the young man surnamed Lu only felt that his vision went black. If it weren't for the servant who saw that the situation was not good and held him up, he would have been unable to stand. 3 months of confinement, this was killing him. He looked at the young scholar, trembling. Even a fool would know that the reason why his father was angry was all because of him. Who on earth was this scholar? After the young man surnamed Lu was taken away by the servant, County Magistrate Lu said apologetically, "County Magistrate Li, I'm really sorry. My son is naughty and mischievous and offended County Magistrate Li. I hope you don't take it to heart." At this time, County Magistrate Lu was anxious. This unfilial son caused trouble everywhere. Today he actually dared to speak arrogantly in front of the prince. After sending County Magistrate Li away, he must teach him a good lesson. If this unfilial son didn't repent, sooner or later he would become like County Magistrate Zhou's brother-in-law and make a big mess for him. Chapter 155. Seeing County Magistrate Li and his son leave, County Magistrate Lu's face darkened again. This unfilial son. With a cold snort, he walked to the back hall of the county government angrily. In order not to follow the footsteps of County Magistrate Zhou, it was time to teach this unfilial son a lesson. "Come and get the family punishment," County Magistrate Lu said in a cold voice, and then a runner trotted away immediately. As a trusted follower of County Magistrate Lu, he was familiar with these things. The county magistrate liked to teach his son a lesson when the weather was good, but he had never been so angry like today. Seeing County Magistrate Lu's face before he left, he observed a moment of silence for his young master in his heart. This time the county magistrate was going to do it for real. After a while, a miserable voice came from a yard in the back hall of the county government. "Father, I know I was wrong. Father, I dare not do it again. Don't hit me. It hurts." The young man surnamed Lu was lying on a bench and his whole body was tied up tightly. County Magistrate Lu held a bamboo stick in his hand and whipped his buttocks fiercely. "I have a small leather whip in my hand and I whip his buttocks. In the Willow Leaf Village, the little maid was humming the song that the son-in-law taught her. She washed Li Yi's Xian official uniform with soap and hung it in the yard. The cloth was thin and the weather was good today, so it could be dried in the evening, waiting for the son-in-law to wear it when he came back. Why hasn't the son-in-law come back yet? Sitting in the yard, the little maid habitually held her cheek in her hand and looked at the door, murmuring to herself. The son-in-law did not return to the village last night, and he might have slept in the shop. She hadn't seen him yet, so she was a little worried. Looking at the door blankly, she gradually held her cheek with both hands, and suddenly thought of a story that the son-in-law once told. It was said that a long time ago there was a woman. Since her husband joined the army, she stood on the North Mountain and looked forward to her husband's return every day. After a long time she turned into a stone, which was called Looking Husband's Stone. She began to imagine that if Xiao Huan kept looking like this, would she turn into a stone? If the son-in-law came back and saw that she had turned into stone, would he be sad? Xiao Huan turned into a stone, would son-in-law cry? If son-in-law's tears fell on the stone she turned into, she should be able to come back to life. That was how the story went. The autumn sun was warm but not glaring. A gentle breeze blew past and the little maid's face was flushed red. After looking in one direction for a long time, she gradually felt sleepy. The son-in-law's chair was very comfortable. Her little body was curled up in it and her eyes were still looking out the door. However, not long after, she gradually closed her eyes and the sound of even breathing could be heard. I say, just admit it. Just sign your name honestly so that you don't have to suffer the torture. Why do you have to do this? The head of the county government said with a bitter face, looking at the man who was tied to the rack with ragged clothes and scars on his face. Pa, you want me to sign my name? Dream on. The ugly man sneered and spat out a mouthful of saliva. If the jailer hadn't dodged in time, he would have been spat on. Damn it, you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. Whip him. The head of the prison stood up angrily and shouted at the two jailers beside him. Ah, whip him hard. When I killed my whole family, I didn't even frown. You. The man sneered and didn't hide his disdain for them. He said sarcastically, if it weren't for that woman, you wouldn't be able to catch me. If I can get out, I will slaughter that woman's whole family. When he said, that woman, the ugly man's expression became more ferocious and there was a little fear on his face. Whip him. Whip him hard. The head of the prison waved his hand angrily. Although he knew that whipping was nothing to this fierce man, at least it was a relief. The longer this guy didn't sign his name, the more tired they would be. However, almost all the punishments had been used, but they still couldn't make him confess. The county magistrate had given him a death order. If he didn't confess within 3 days, he, the head of the prison, would go home and farm. The jailer whipped him a few times, but there was no expression on the ugly man's face. At this moment, a voice came from behind. He still hasn't confessed? Hearing this voice, the head of the prison trembled. He hurriedly turned around and said flatteringly, Lord Liu, this guy is very stubborn. He won't confess no matter what. County Magistrate Liu frowned. This man was a heinous murderer who had killed several people. The evidence was conclusive. It was only a matter of time before he was sentenced. However, if he didn't sign his name and confess, wouldn't it show that he was incompetent when the Ministry of Justice arrested him? At this moment, a runner behind County Magistrate Liu took a step forward and said in a low voice, Lord, I might have a way to make the prisoner confess. What way do you have? Try it for now. County Magistrate Liu said to the runner. He was desperate. The runner took a deep breath. He knew that this might be his chance to show off in front of County Magistrate Liu. He turned to another runner and said, Danny, you take out the aphrodisiac you've hidden. The runner was stunned. Then his face turned red. He glared at him and said, Who's hiding aphrodisiac? Lord, don't listen to his nonsense. Of course, he couldn't admit that he had hidden aphrodisiac. Otherwise, wouldn't it be equivalent to admitting that he was incompetent in front of so many people? All right. Everyone knows what you've done. Don't be so wishy-washy. Take it out quickly. Don't let Lord Liu wait for too long. The runner didn't listen to his explanation at all and urged him. The tall runner opened his mouth but didn't say anything in the end. He obediently took out a bag of powder from his pocket. Ah, what are you doing with the aphrodisiac? Are you looking for a Xiaonyang to make me feel good? The government runner didn't deliberately lower his voice when he spoke. The ugly man laughed impudently and said in a mocking tone. The runner didn't pay attention to him at all. He was thinking of the scene where County Magistrate Li solved 2 cases in a row in the court with ease. He couldn't help showing deep admiration in his eyes. After seeing County Magistrate Li's way of solving cases, the runner was greatly enlightened. He seemed to feel that a new world was slowly opening to him. What do you want it for? County Magistrate Lu frowned and looked at him. He didn't know what the aphrodisiac had to do with making this man confess. However, he was thinking that he should find a chance to ask Danny where he bought the medicine. Recently, he seemed to be a bit uncomfortable under the bed. The runner glanced at the ugly man and said, Lord, I know some people who like to have sex with men. Think about it. If they take this medicine, he changed his tone and looked at the ugly man again. He opened his mouth and said, in this way there won't be any wounds left. Besides, strong men like you seem to be their favorite. When the runner said this, the sneer on the ugly man's face had already disappeared. What appeared on his face was endless fear. Chapter 156. Not only the ugly man but also County Magistrate Lu, the jailers and the head of the prison. After hearing the words, a certain part of their body involuntarily tightened. A certain picture flashed in their mind and they dared not to imagine it again. A gentleman prefers death to humiliation. Give me a quick death if you have the guts. The ugly man's facial muscles trembled as he roared. Obviously, the words of the runner just now had a great impact on him. To him, even death was 1,000, no 10,000 times better than this humiliation. As long as he thought of that scene in his mind, he shivered all over and shuddered with fear. Don't talk. He had just started, but he was interrupted by the criminal. The runner waved his hand impatiently and continued to say to County Magistrate Lu, Your Honor, if this method doesn't work, I have other ways. For example, we can find some male dogs in heat and feed the criminal with the aphrodisiac. You. As a civil official, County Magistrate Lu had never heard of such a scene. He tried not to think about the scene described by the runner, but the more he tried to ignore it, the clearer the scene became in his mind. Suddenly, his stomach turned upside down and he couldn't stop retching with his hands on the table. Not only County Magistrate Lu, but also the jailers in the county government prison turned pale after hearing these words. How on earth did he come up with such an inhumane punishment? It was a waste of talent that this guy didn't work as a jailer. The runner who came up with the idea was also complacent at this time. He seemed to have regarded County Magistrate Li, whom he had only met once, as his life mentor. What would Li Yi feel if he knew that he had such an admirer? He would probably kick this disgusting guy to death. I'm a dignified man. How could I be insulted like this? You'll die a horrible death. If the bailiff's first words had only caused the fierce man to feel some fear, then his second words had already caused the ugly man to be on the verge of collapse. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had a breath left to hold on, he would have long since knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. For him, being stabbed by a sword or saber was nothing more than a frown. But if he was subjected to that kind of torture, as the runner said, he would probably live in the endless shadow for the rest of his life. Shut up. Being interrupted for the second time, the local government runner was a little angry. After scolding him, he ran to County Magistrate Lu, who had just recovered and was stroking his chest, and said again, If this method doesn't work, I have another idea. We can. Blarg. Blarg. This time, County Magistrate Lu was not the only one who retched. Even the jailers who usually tortured the prisoners couldn't help but retch while leaning against the wall. The 2 bailiffs on duty at the entrance of the county jail suddenly heard a shrill scream coming from within the jail. Their bodies involuntarily trembled, but they quickly returned to normal after looking at each other. As guards of the county prison, they were already used to this kind of situation. County Magistrate Lu had just brought people in. He was probably torturing the villains who had slaughtered the whole family and refused to confess. After a while, County Magistrate Lu walked out of the prison with a pale face but an unconcealable joy. However, you've done very well today. County Magistrate Lu patted the shoulder of the local government runner, and said a word of praise while resisting the urge to vomit. I was also inspired by County Magistrate Li. The local government runner was not arrogant, but said very modestly, Go to the back office to get the reward yourself. County Magistrate Lu nodded and said, "Thank you, sir." Seeing the local government runner go to the back office with a smile on his face and a black dog running in front of him, County Magistrate Lu seemed to think of something, and his face immediately turned pale. Blarg. At the entrance of the county jail, the two guards on duty looked at County Magistrate Lu, who was holding the wall and retching for no reason as if he was having a stroke. "Boss, you didn't see it." At that time County Magistrate Li shouted with a cold face, "Come on, drag him out and behead him." The servant who stole the silver was so scared that he collapsed in the court and confessed to his crime. County Magistrate Li is really amazing. That crafty servant just rubbed his nose and County Magistrate Li could tell that he was lying as if he could see through his mind. If we have 10% of County Magistrate Li's ability, what case can't we solve? Also the punishment proposed by County Magistrate Li, where ants crawled all over his body. Just thinking about it makes me itch all over. If it was really carried out, I'm afraid that the person would be tortured to madness. But County Magistrate Li just wanted to scare him. Zhao Feng was so scared that his face turned pale and he confessed on the spot. On the street of the prefectural city, a constable was narrating to the female constable what he saw in the court just now with his saliva flying everywhere. His words were full of praise for County Magistrate Li, whom he met for the first time. In the end he said with great pity, "Boss, you were patrolling the street at that time, so you didn't see the scene of County Magistrate Li's invincible power. What a pity." Li Mingzhu slightly distanced herself from the bailiff, avoiding his splattering saliva. She folded her arms in front of her chest and listened to his story with great interest. She really didn't misjudge him. This scholar was actually able to make these bailiffs trust him so much in such a short period of time. He must have some skills that she didn't know about. Such a capable person should be used by the country. How could he live in a small shop all day long? Also, in the future his skill of judging people must be promoted by the Ministry of Justice and all the yamens. It can greatly reduce the need for torture and interrogation, which will be of great help in handling cases. Oh, when I see him tomorrow I'll ask him why 2 stones, one big and one small, fell to the ground at the same time. Walking leisurely in the village, 2 figures walked toward him. One was a 7 or 8-year-old naughty child who bowed respectfully and said, "Hello, sir." When the man came closer he realized that it was Li Yi. He slapped the naughty child's head and said angrily, "Don't call me sir in the future. Call me County Lieutenant." The naughty child nodded as if he understood. Before the man spoke again, Li Yi waved his hand and walked in the direction of his home. Before he could reach the door, a stooped figure walked out from the courtyard. When second granduncle saw Li Yi, a smile appeared on his wrinkled face. "Not bad. I didn't expect to see an official in the stockade village in my lifetime. Not bad, little boy. You've got a promising future." Not only did second granduncle have bad hearing, but his mind was also getting muddled. He was an outsider. How could he be a member of Willow Leaf Village? Time waited for no man. He was getting old and might not be far from Alzheimer's. Li Yi sighed in his heart and saluted as a junior. When he opened the courtyard door and walked in, he saw a small figure curled up on a rocking chair in the courtyard, sleeping soundly. Chapter 157. The little maidservant fell asleep on the rocking chair. Although it was not yet winter, it was still a little chilly in the afternoon of autumn when the sun gradually set in the west. Her thin and delicate body was curled up in the chair and her delicate brows were slightly furrowed. She probably felt a little chilly in her sleep. Li Yi shook his head and took off his outer robe to cover her body. Xiao Huan's furrowed brows gradually relaxed. Through the arched door between the inner and outer courtyards, he could see a graceful figure. She did not return to her room to change into another robe. She walked to the arched door and looked over. The woman in white danced with the wind. Her posture was graceful. From afar there seemed to be a faint sense of transcendence. She was like a fairy in the clouds that would be gone with the wind in the next moment. Li Yi had to admit that after these days her Tai Chi had become more proficient than his. "Husband, you're back. Have you eaten?" Lu Rui had actually noticed Li Yi's appearance a long time ago. However, she could not interrupt him when she was practicing. After she stopped, she turned around and said, "If not, I'll do it now." Li Yi touched his stomach subconsciously. Because he was in a bad mood, he really did not eat today. "Husband, please wait for a moment." I'll do it now. Lu Rui already understood. She smiled and walked in the direction of the kitchen. Not long after, Li Yi held a bowl of noodles and wolfed it down. He did not realize it before, but after Rui mentioned it he felt unbearably hungry and the bowl of noodles was quickly emptied. Xiaohuan washed your official robe just now. It will probably be dry at night. Remember to bring it when you go down the mountain tomorrow. Husband doesn't know how to use a saber, so you probably won't be able to use it. However, you still have to carry it with you. It will be of some use eventually. Also, it's best if husband learns a set of saber techniques. It's somewhat dangerous to hunt down bandits. Some bandits are from the underworld and are skilled in martial arts. Husband, you must be careful when you're on a mission. Lu Rui said softly while Li Yi was eating. Since Rui has nothing to do at home, why don't we let her stay by my husband's side? Even if we really meet a Greenwood tyrant, she'll be able to handle it. Although the position of a county lieutenant was a little more dangerous than other officials, it wasn't that exaggerated. If catching a thief could put one's life in danger, the former county lieutenant would have died many times. Although these matters were under the jurisdiction of the county magistrate, the actual executors were the constables. At that time he would throw everything to Li Emingsu. No matter if she was a princess or a princess, she should be prepared to be tricked by herself. Li Yi shook his head and said, "There's no need. I don't know how long this county lieutenant can last. Forget it, let's not talk about this. Let's go out and take a walk." Of course, he was not the least bit interested in being forced to do something. He wondered how long it would take for his superiors to remove him from his position if he became a county magistrate who did nothing and took his salary. This was a safer method that Li Yi thought of on his way back. He wouldn't go to jail and could completely get rid of this burden. As the two of them walked out of the courtyard, their silhouettes gradually disappeared into the distance. At the same time, a young man walked out from the house next door. Looking at their disappearing silhouettes, his face darkened. He punched the wall, causing dust to fall down. Autumn was getting stronger and the leaves on the trees began to fall. The somber atmosphere became even more intense in the afternoon. My husband doesn't seem to like being an official. The two of them walked on a small path behind the village. They were already some distance away from the village and there was a gurgling stream on the side. Lu Rui said softly. "That's right." Li Yi sighed and said, "What's so good about being an official? It's not as free as it is now. I was thinking that when I have time in the future I'll go out and explore the Jianghu. That way I won't have wasted my time in this world. Now I can only think about it. Your mind is not in the court but in the Jianghu. My husband really doesn't look like a scholar." Lu Rui looked at him and said with a smile. "The Jianghu is so interesting, much more interesting than the court." In fact, Li Yi still had a little hope of becoming a hero of the generation. Wearing fresh clothes and riding a horse, traveling to the ends of the world with a sword, just like the heroes in the novels. Which hero would stay in the county government all day long? Lu Rui just smiled and said, "Husband, don't be deceived by those stories. There are no heroes in Jianghu. How can a group of uncivilized people call themselves heroes? They commit murder and arson, and there are countless people who deceive the world to gain fame." "I see. The Jianghu in this world seemed to be a little different, but the fire in Li Yi's heart was not extinguished." The two of them walked to the end of the path and were about to turn back. Lu Rui pointed to a stone tablet in the field and said, "That's the grave of my parents." Only then did Li Yi notice that there were many stone tablets like this in the open space. He could vaguely see the words carved on the stone tablet closest to him. Li Yi guessed in his heart, "Is this the ancestral grave of the Lu family?" Since they passed by the graveyard of his father-in-law and mother-in-law, it was a little inappropriate to pay their respects. Today was not a special day and they just passed by. They didn't prepare anything and simply paid their respects. When they walked back, Lu Rui rarely talked about the things of the previous generation. "In my grandfather's generation the stockade was not like what it is now. The troubled times had just ended. Although the stockade was disbanded, the habits didn't change. I heard that when my father and mother got married, there was no order from parents or matchmakers at all. My grandfather asked people to put down the betrothal gifts in the family's home, and then they took the bride and left. Now when talking about things like kidnapping, she didn't need to avoid anything. I don't know what my parents were like at the beginning, but later they lived like this. Only then did Li Yi know that kidnapping the bride was the tradition of the Lu family. In this way he just happened to be in time. Along the way they talked about some trivial things. Li Yi was a little surprised in his heart. Until now she didn't even ask what was going on with this inexplicable county lieutenant. It seemed that she had accepted it. This made him have no chance to say the explanation he had prepared. It was windy outside. When they walked to the door, Lu Rui came over to help him tidy up his clothes and said, "My husband inexplicably became a county lieutenant, and I was also very surprised. Later, I thought that if my husband really became a county lieutenant, I would be the county lieutenant's wife in the future, wouldn't I?" Speaking of this, even she couldn't help laughing. Li Yi was stunned. After a long time, he turned to look at her and made a fist and palm salute with a strange expression. "County lieutenant's wife, I'm sorry. You're welcome. She imitated the way people in Jianghu and made a fist and palm salute with a smile on her face. Chapter 158. What did you say? Ahu confessed. In a dark room in the commoner's residential area in the northern district of Qing'an Prefecture, a burly figure slammed the table, his face full of disbelief. "I bribed a bailiff from the county government. He said that Ahu confessed a few days ago and was taken away by the Ministry of Justice yesterday," another person sitting next to him said in a low voice. "With the crimes he has committed, I'm afraid he won't be able to get out once he enters the Ministry of Justice." The burly figure stood up, and an oppressive aura suddenly exploded. The expressions of the people in the room changed slightly. "With Ahu's character, how could he?" one of them said with a look of pity, shaking his head. "If he was in the county government they could think of a way to save him. But if he was in the Ministry of Justice he would be in a land of death with no hope of ever seeing the light of day again." This sudden incident had completely disrupted their plans, causing all the preparations that they had made these days to fall short of success. If it weren't for that woman, how could Ahu have been caught? A gloomy voice sounded in the room. "If it were only those useless people in the yamen, I could kill them all with one hand. Although it wasn't that woman who did it herself, Ahu was ruined by her. We have to avenge him." Another voice sounded in the room. After a short moment, the gloomy voice said angrily, "Are we unable to do anything to that woman with Justice Brothers? Why don't we take advantage of the darkness of the night to kill our way to her door and slaughter her entire family? Can be considered as taking revenge for Ahu." "I agree. I have no objections either." The rest of the people in the room agreed with this suggestion. The people of the Greenwood Forest had always acted according to their whims. To them human lives were like grass. Every one of them carried at least one life on their shoulders. "All of you shut up." Seeing that the room had become noisy, the burly figure suddenly shouted angrily. Only then did everyone quiet down. "Although that woman is hateful, her martial arts are really good. Last time my brothers and I joined forces to ambush her, but we only slightly injured her. In the end, Ahu was still captured by her and handed over to the yamen. Even if we go to her now we probably won't get anything out of it. Besides, who knows if she has any helpers? We can't act rashly. Big brother is right." A man stood up and said, "You haven't fought with that woman, so you don't know how terrifying she is. If you act rashly, I'm afraid you'll follow in Ahu's footsteps." When he said this, his face was filled with a strong sense of fear. He had fought with the woman before. Several of his brothers had besieged her, but in the end she had defeated one of them. The rest of them could only retreat temporarily. The woman was young, but her martial arts were extremely high. If they continued to fight with her, Ahu would not be the only one who had been defeated last time. "Are we just going to let this go?" one of them said indignantly. At this moment the burly figure spoke again. "We must avenge Ahu, but this matter must be considered at length. That woman has been working for the yamen for the past 2 years and has offended many heroes of the underworld. Who knows how many people want her dead? If we can form an alliance with them, this matter will be greatly feasible." "This is a brilliant plan. Big brother is right. I need to find those who have a grudge against that woman first. There's no hurry for this. There's a more urgent matter at hand. A few days ago we were discovered by a female constable on the street. That person's martial arts is very powerful, and it wasn't easy for us to escape from her. I think our traces have been targeted by the yamen. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, It's better to leave the city and lie low. As the burly man spoke, the voices in the dark room gradually quieted down. What, this is the gift you were talking about? Li Xian held a small porcelain bottle in his hand, and his voice was raised an octave higher than usual. Seeing that Li Yi nodded, a trace of black lines appeared on his face. Isn't this just Ruidu? The prince's mansion has as much as you want, and even the servants in the mansion have a bottle each. You want me to give this to mother? Li Xian somewhat regretted handing this matter to Li Yi, and he didn't pay attention to it anymore. He didn't expect that he would be so unreliable this time. That painting was not bad, but this Ruidu, could he be a little more careful? If he had known that this would be the result, it would have been better for him to search during this period of time to see if there were any rare treasures. It was better than stupidly holding a bottle of Ruidu when the time came. Li Yi also didn't bother to explain to him. Because he didn't have time to customize a new porcelain bottle, he used the packaging of Ruidu. However, it contained the first batch of perfume that he had successfully tested. There weren't many flowers that bloomed in autumn, and there were even fewer that could be used to make perfume. After he finally found all the materials and made the perfume according to the book, he found that the fragrance would dissipate very quickly and wouldn't last long. Later, he looked up a lot of information and finally found something called fragrance retention agent in a corner. After adding musk ingredients, it wasn't until 2 days ago that the real perfume was finally developed. He rarely cared so much about unimportant things, and this guy actually didn't appreciate it. You don't want it? Hey, I'll give it to Arrestor Li. Li Yi took the porcelain bottle from his hand and threw it in the direction of the door. What is this? Ruidu. Emingzu reached out and took it. As soon as she unscrewed the lid, a faint fragrance escaped. She was surprised. The liquid in this bottle didn't have the refreshing smell of Ruidu. Instead, it had a faint fragrance. It wasn't as pungent as the fragrance of the perfume bag, but it seemed to be more suitable for women. It's not Ruidu. Li Xian's nose didn't have any problems. Naturally, he smelled the fragrance. He couldn't help but regret that he was too anxious just now. He should have opened it first to confirm. Emingzu this. He said and turned to look at Li Yi. He asked, what is this called? Perfume. Li Yi said lazily. Yes, perfume. I intend to give this perfume to my mother. It's her birthday in 2 days. You see, this perfume was given to me by County Arrestor Li. If you want it, you can ask him again. Emingzi glanced at him and put away the small porcelain bottle. She turned around and left without giving him a second chance to speak. I was wrong just now. Li Xian turned back and looked at Li Yi with a smile. He said, that bottle of perfume was taken away by Emingzu. Give me a few more bottles. What perfume? Li Yi looked up at him and asked with a puzzled face. Chapter 159. A sin committed by heaven could be forgiven, but a sin committed by oneself could not be avoided. Looking at Li Yi's confused face as if he had amnesia and had completely forgotten what perfume was, Li Xian's mouth couldn't help but twitch. 10 taels of silver? Li Xian asked tentatively. Li Yi glanced at him and didn't seem to be moved. In the past, when his family was so poor that they didn't even have food to eat, 10 taels of silver was a huge sum of money for him. He didn't have to worry about food anymore. But now he didn't know how many 10 taels of silver came into his account every day. He didn't have to bow down for this bit of money. Seeing that his amnesia hadn't recovered, Li Xian gritted his teeth and said, I found a fine horse recently. I'll give it to you. 2 bottles at most, no more. Li Yi looked at him and finally spoke. He often traveled between the stockade and the prefectural city. It wasn't a good idea to always rent a carriage from a carriage shop. It was time to have Li Xian give him a horse. Just because he said a few words, he lost a good horse worth several hundred taels of silver. Li Xian felt depressed. After leaving behind an invitation, he took the 2 bottles of perfume and left gloomily. 2 days later, Wang Fei's birthday banquet. Li Yi opened the invitation, glanced at it and put it to the side. Although he wasn't interested in Wang Fei's birthday banquet, since Li Xian had already sent an invitation, it wouldn't be good to embarrass him. At most he would get a free meal and leave after he was full. Ning Wangfu was of such high class, there shouldn't be a lack of delicacies. Speaking of which, he really didn't know what the nobles of the imperial family usually ate. Thinking of this, the unwillingness in his heart lessened a little. It was just that Zhou Xian was too stingy and only gave one invitation. Otherwise, if a few more people went, they could at least earn back the cost. Zhou Xian was quite free. Whether it was the portrait or the perfume, he had personally made them. He just had to wait for the goods. Extorting a horse from him was a light punishment. The location of the Wang Fei's birthday banquet was, of course, Ning Wang Fu. Li Yi might not be familiar with the route, but he had been dragged here by Zhou Xian last time, so he knew the way. Ning Wang Fu's status was high. They had to give Ning Wang face. For Wang Fei's birthday banquet, there naturally wouldn't be a lack of guests. Those who had come were all prominent figures in Qing and Fu. There were civil and military officials, and even many people from the capital had come. From afar, Li Yi could see Steward Wang standing at the door, welcoming every guest with a smile. At the same time, he checked their invitations, accepted their gifts, and recorded them in the register. Keep your eyes open later. We only recognize the invitation card and not the person. No matter who comes, we can't let him in without an invitation card. Taking advantage of the free time, Steward Wang lectured the few servants at the door who welcomed the guests. Wang Fei's birthday banquet was a major event. Tonight there were many important people in the Wang Fu. Other than the high officials and nobles from the prefectural city and the capital, there were also the new scholars from Qing and Fu who had passed the imperial examinations. Wang Fei's birthday banquet was one of them. Inviting people of insight to discuss state affairs was also the highlight of the night. The welcoming area at the door was a very important part. If something went wrong, no one would be able to bear the responsibility. Hearing Steward Wang's lecture, the servants hurriedly agreed. Recently, Steward Wang had been in the limelight. There was hope that after the old steward retired, he would become the #1 candidate to be the head steward of the Wang Fu. "Oli, you're finally here. The young prince has been waiting for a long time." When Steward Wang saw Li Yi walk over from afar, the smile on his face grew wider and he hurriedly ran over. This time his welcome to Li Yi came from the bottom of his heart. The business of Rui's nectar had brought in huge profits for the Wang Fu. The strong liquor that had just been released had caused many wine lovers to fight over it. It was even more popular than Rui's nectar. Just the profits from the past few days were enough to make Steward Wang smile from ear to ear. These few days, Steward Wang seemed to see mountains of gold and silver crashing down on him. Even the prince praised the strong liquor and praised him in front of everyone. These few days, Steward Wang was even floating when he walked. He had originally thought that he could only be a small steward for foreign affairs in this life. It was Li Yi who brought him hope. If it wasn't for the fact that he saw that the young prince had a close relationship with him, Steward Wang would have wanted to make a blood oath with him and become sworn brothers. Although Steward Wang had been just as warm and courteous when he came, he had never seen him so enthusiastic. When the servants in charge of welcoming the guests saw this, they couldn't help but be surprised. The guests who had just presented their gifts and had not yet stepped into the door also turned to look at this scene. They were also surprised. This person was so young, but the steward of the Wang Fu was so polite to him. Could it be that he was also a big shot? "Steward Wang, long time no see." Li Yi smiled and cupped one hand in the other before his chest. He handed over something in his hand. After thinking about it, he felt that there was no good gift to give. If he gave something more expensive, the Wang Fu didn't lack it and he was reluctant to buy it. If he gave something novel, he was afraid that it would steal Zhou Xian's limelight. Of course, the main reason was that he was too lazy to think about it. It was better to write this congratulatory speech in person, which was full of sincerity and not conventional. A congratulatory speech could be finished in an hour. It took some time for the ink to dry. He casually found a shop to frame it and brought it here to freeload, to attend the birthday banquet of the Wang Fu. "Sir, please show me your invitation." A person hurried over and took the thing from Li Yi's hand. He said with a smile, "You insensible thing. Go away. Does Li need an invitation?" Steward Wang reprimanded the servant with a sullen face. Then he looked at Li Yi and said with a smile, "Li, I will take you in. The little prince said that as long as you come, I will take you to him immediately." Seeing Steward Wang take the young man in, the servant who was reprimanded was confused. Didn't Steward Wang say that no matter who came he must show the invitation? Didn't he say that only the invitation would be recognized and not the person? Tonight the Wang Fu was very lively. Along the way, Li Yi saw many men and women dressed in gorgeous clothes talking and laughing at the table in the courtyard. There were many Confucian scholars and scholars with extraordinary temperament. In the open space next to them, there was a singer singing with a mellow voice. This atmosphere was somewhat similar to the poetry meeting that he attended. Perhaps the banquets of the ancient people all liked this style. After following Steward Wang and turning left and right, they went deep into the Wang Fu. Gradually the voices became smaller. Chapter 160. When he saw Li Xian again, he was in his room staring at a kite in a daze. It was the princess's birthday, and the crown prince was hiding in his room watching a kite at night. No matter how he thought about it, it was not normal. When he saw Li Yi, his eyes lit up. He grabbed the kite and stood up, saying, "Today I carried a heavy weight on this kite and threw it from the roof. It was like a falling leaf, very slow. If I made this kite bigger, it could naturally carry more weight. If I made it bigger, wouldn't it be able to carry a person from the sky?" After listening to his words, Li Yi felt that as a second generation he was really bearing his talent. If he could give him a little more inspiration, he was afraid that on the other side of the ocean in the future, when Galileo discovered the law of free fall, Newton discovered the law of universal gravitation, and the Wright brothers invented the airplane, he would not be praised by people but scolded as a shameless plagiarist dog. Of course, the premise was that there would still be such people in this world. "In theory, people can fly into the sky," Li Yi said as he looked at him. This sentence undoubtedly brought light to Li Xian's world and illuminated his entire life. He had been thinking about these things recently, but he could not verify them. He could not make a big kite for the guards of the prince's mansion to carry and jump off the cliff. Li Yi's affirmative answer made his heart feel at ease. Next, he only needed to do what he had been doing these days and slowly advance toward his goal. One day he would realize what he wanted in his heart. In this period of time, in Li Xian's eyes, the whole world had already undergone earth-shaking changes. He had never been to the seaside, but he had sent people to ask experienced boatmen. He knew that when standing on the seaside and looking at the sea, when a ship sailed from afar, one would first see the mast and then the hull. This confirmed what Li Yi had said. The ground under their feet was not flat, it was like a silk ball. The idea that he had just put forward was also something that he had slowly pushed forward over the past few days. He imagined that one day humans could fly in the sky like birds. What kind of situation would that be? Of course, these things couldn't be accomplished overnight. They needed to be realized slowly. Shaking his head, he tossed these thoughts to the back of his mind and said, "Let's go for a walk outside." Li Xian could be considered half a master of the prince's mansion. Among the guests tonight there were many who knew him. Seeing him and a stranger appear together, the two seemed to be quite friendly. When he was about to raise his head to greet them, the other had already walked past him. He stood there awkwardly with his mouth half open, but his heart was full of doubt. He had long known that Prince Ning's crown prince did not stick to a pattern, and now it seemed that the rumors were true. He just didn't know what kind of person that young man was, that he could make Prince Ning personally accompany him. As the main characters of the night, Ning Wang and Ning Wang Fei were of noble status. Naturally, they wouldn't show their faces outside at all times. Only some important guests were qualified for them to personally accompany them. At this time, in a brightly lit hall, there were a few figures. Sitting on the main seat was a graceful and noble woman. She smiled and said, "A few days ago, Yan Fei personally returned to the palace from Qing'an province and brought back a strange item called ruidu. His Majesty greatly praised it and has included it as a tribute. I just didn't think that this ruidu would come from the prince's mansion. If Jejia likes it, then when you return to the palace this time, bring some back." Ning Wang and Ning Wang Fei sat on either side of her. The one who spoke was Ning Wang Fei. "Then thank you, sister. When His Majesty reads memorials, he can't do without this item," the noble woman said with a smile. Even though this was Ning Wang Fu, Ning Wang and Ning Wang Fei were very polite to this woman. It was because of her special identity that even they hadn't thought that she would come to this birthday celebration without a notice. Walking with Li Xian would always attract a crowd of onlookers. Li Yi found an excuse to send him away. He strolled around alone for a while and tasted the food that the prince's mansion used to entertain guests. He felt slightly disappointed. The so-called food was only esu. It was far from what he had hoped for. "You brat, what are you doing here? An extremely surprised and shocked voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Li Yi stilled and turned his head. He saw Professor Feng, who he had seen that day, pointing at him with an angry expression. This voice was too sudden, and the surrounding people were also startled. Their gazes involuntarily turned in that direction. Professor Feng was very famous in Qinghai province, especially to the students. There were many people who had been taught by him. They were all curious who could have made Professor Feng so angry. Li Yi was almost scared out of his wits. He had no enmity with Professor Feng, but looking at him like this, it was as if he had sullied Professor Feng's daughter's chastity and his father-in-law was coming to settle the score. It would be strange if others did not misunderstand. Professor Feng, what is the meaning of this? Li Yi turned to look at him. Brat, didn't you say that you had a strange illness since you were young? Every time you thought about taking the scholarly exams, you would be bedridden and fall ill? Why is it that after becoming a county lieutenant, you look more energetic? Every time Professor Feng thought of the lies he had made up that day and how he had foolishly believed them, he would feel a sense of shame in his heart. After teaching so many students for so many years, even if it was a scholar, they would have to be respectful to him. He had actually been fooled by an elementary scholar. After so long, he still couldn't swallow this anger. When he heard from Prefectural Magistrate Dong that this fellow was already the county lieutenant of Anxi province, his heart was even more depressed. Li Yi looked at him with some dissatisfaction. As a dignified prefectural school's professor, every time he opened his mouth he would call him a brat. Where was his manners? It seemed like this Professor Feng had spent so many years studying the sage's books in vain. If he had the ability, he should have asked the current emperor about the matter of him becoming a county lieutenant. Why was he venting his anger in front of him? Did he think that he was willing? I've already said that it's a strange illness. Who knows when it will get better? Maybe this position of county lieutenant is a good medicine? Li Yi said lazily. He picked up a plate of pastries and walked past Professor Feng. He didn't want to be called a brat by this Professor Feng again. Even though the other party's rank was higher than his, could a city's education bureau director control a county's public security bureau director? Obviously not. Since that was the case, there was no need to bother with him anymore. Incurable, incurable. Professor Feng watched as the scholar left indifferently after being ignored. He waved his sleeves and said angrily. As for those officials who had been reprimanded by Professor Feng, they looked at Li Yi's back with a little respect. After so many years, this was the first time they saw a student who dared to speak to Professor Feng in such a manner. Respect, respect. Chapter 161. What made Brother Feng so angry? Seeing Professor Feng blowing his beard and glaring at him from afar, many people who were familiar with him walked over. One of them, a middle-aged man, looked at him and asked in confusion. Forget it, don't mention it again. Professor Feng was afraid that if he continued to talk about this matter, he would become sick from his unambitious bookish attitude, so he waved his hand and said, Hee, did that county magistrate Li offend Professor Feng again? A slightly teasing voice sounded. When everyone turned their heads to look, they all put on a serious expression and cupped their fists. Lord Dong. The person who came was Magistrate Dong. Magistrate Dong smiled and waved his hand. Tonight there is only Dong Wenun, no Lord Dong. Seeing that Magistrate Dong was so casual, everyone gradually relaxed. Finally, someone couldn't help but ask, May I know what's going on with the county magistrate Li that Brother Wenyun mentioned? Magistrate Dong laughed and said, You have to ask Professor Feng about this. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Professor Feng could not hide it anymore, so he told them everything from the beginning to the end. He actually doesn't want to be an official? A chronic illness that prevents him from becoming an official? Brother Feng actually believed this kind of excuse. That Rules for Disciples is an excellent work. I just read it yesterday. I heard that the new Anxi County Magistrate was personally conferred by His Majesty. Is that true? Of course it's true. But since he has contributed to education, he should be conferred the title of a scholar. Why did His Majesty confer him the title of County Magistrate? After listening to Professor Feng's story, everyone started to discuss. Magistrate Dong coughed and said, His Majesty must have some deep meaning behind this. We can't make any wild guesses. The officials who were curious about this immediately shut their mouths when they heard this. Guessing the emperor's intentions was a taboo for an official. Was that person really County Magistrate Li? County Magistrate Lu followed behind Magistrate Dong. The familiar figure appeared in his mind and his heart trembled again. It was thanks to Magistrate Dong that he had the right to come here tonight. Even so, he had to act cautiously, fearing that he would accidentally anger some important person. However, County Magistrate Li was able to act neither servile nor overbearing in front of Professor Feng, whose rank was much higher than his. He even left in a carefree manner after the incident, as if the Wang Fu was his own home. Magistrate Lu would never believe that he was just an ordinary county magistrate. No, it seemed that when he returned to the county government today, he had to sternly warn that unfilial son to stay in the government office for a period of time and not go out to cause trouble. He should also forget about the misunderstanding with County Lieutenant Li as soon as possible. I heard that Mimi had a chronic illness a few days ago. As an elder sister, I should have come to visit, but it is not easy to leave the palace. Seeing that Mimi's complexion is good, I can relax. The elegant and noble woman held Ning Wangfei's hand and said with a smile, "Thank you, Your Highness, for your concern. Your concubine's body is fine now," Princess Ning said softly. The beautiful woman patted her hand and said, "What concubine? There are no outsiders here. You and I can call each other sisters." With that, her face showed some confusion and she said, "That's right, why didn't I see Xian'er today?" Princess Ning smiled and said, "He doesn't know that sister has come. He is probably still in his room. I will send someone to call him." As soon as she finished speaking, a figure walked in from the door. "Father, mother." As soon as Li Xian stepped into the room, he saw that other than his mother, there was another woman in the room. When he saw her appearance clearly, he was stunned for a moment, then immediately knelt on the ground. "Xian'er greets Your Highness." The elegant and beautiful woman immediately smiled and personally walked up to him. She helped him up and said, "Child, we haven't seen each other for many years, but you have become polite to me." She looked Li Xian up and down and nodded with satisfaction. She said, "I haven't seen you for many years. Xian'er has really grown up. You look so talented. Who would remember the little fellow who had a runny nose all day?" The beautiful woman's words caused Li Xian's face to slightly redden. When he was young, he had been sent to the palace to receive instruction with the princes and princesses. At that time, the empress had treated him very well. Far away from the palace in the capital, he was often bullied by the princes. When he was bullied, the empress would always stand up for him, reprimanding and punishing the princes. In that period of time, his feelings for the empress had even surpassed that of his birth mother. Even now, he still remembered those princes who bullied him after being beaten up by Mingzhu, still had to stand in a row and let the empress reprimand them with a stern face. Every time this happened, he would stand behind the empress and secretly laugh. Although his nose and face were also swollen, his heart was very happy. After so many years, seeing the empress again, it was inevitable that there would be a sense of alienation. But after the other's words, the estrangement caused by time was instantly swept away. "Just now you wanted to present a gift to Wang Fei, right? Let the empress see what good thing Xian'er has given to Wang Fei." After the beautiful woman sat back on the main seat, her eyes were still looking at Li Xian as she asked with a smile. Li Xian waved his hand towards the door and a servant came in with an exquisite brocade box. Li Xian took the brocade box from his hand and respectfully knelt in front of Ning Wangfei. He said, "This child wishes that Mufei's appearance will not grow old, and that you will always be young and live as long as the heavens." Usually he felt closer to calling them father and mother. On such a serious occasion, even the way he addressed them became serious. "What appearance will not grow old, forever young? Where did you learn these words from?" When Ning Wangfei heard these words, she stilled for a moment. It was the first time she had heard such birthday greetings. But even though she was surprised, she was still somewhat happy inside. After all, as a woman who didn't want their appearance to not grow old. Even if this was impossible, who didn't like to hear good words? Li Xian stood up from the ground and personally opened the brocade box to take out an exquisite porcelain bottle. In order to avoid misunderstandings, the original Rui Du porcelain bottle had naturally been changed by him. This porcelain bottle was unusually exquisite. After it was opened, a faint fragrance came out of the bottle. So fragrant. What is this? Seeing the Wang Fei look at him, Li Xian explained, "This is called perfume. It is made from the essence of flower petals." He said the wondrous words that Li Yi had taught him. Not just the Wang Fei, even the Empress was stunned. Women were naturally sensitive to perfume. Even if they had never heard of this thing before, they only needed to think about it to know its use. Which woman didn't want to be the special one? No matter where she went, there would be a fresh and elegant smell. No woman would be able to refuse such a gift. Looking at the perfume in Ning Wang Fei's hands, the Empress, who was sitting at the head, had a slightly envious expression. There was also a faint trace of loneliness that no one could detect. Chapter 162. As the current Empress, the head of the harem and the motherly model of the world, there were all kinds of rare things in the palace. Although the perfume was good, it could only cause her mood to fluctuate for a moment. However, as the Empress, it was not easy for her to leave the palace. She did not know if she could have such a long journey again in her lifetime. She stared blankly at the young man in the hall. After so many years, he was no longer the naughty child he used to be. "Your Highness, there's another bottle of perfume here. I'll give it to you." Li Xian saw her staring blankly at him and thought that the Empress was also interested in the perfume. He had originally planned to give both bottles to his mother, but he changed his mind at the moment. When he was young, Her Majesty the Empress had treated him very well. Even though so much time had passed, Li Xian still remembered his kindness. The Empress's gaze was gentle as she accepted the perfume with a smile. Li Xian walked down and opened the painting impatiently. He said, "Mother, this is the portrait that I drew for you. Do you like it?" After he opened the portrait, the Empress also looked over. She was slightly taken aback when she saw the lifelike portrait. She couldn't help but exclaim, "This portrait. So realistic. I'm afraid that even the painters of the palace wouldn't be able to draw it." When she saw the painting, even the Empress's face showed a hint of amazement. She then rolled her eyes at him and said, "Do you think I don't know how capable you are? This painting must have been drawn by someone else. No wonder you took a few portraits from me a few days ago. I should have thought of it." Being mercilessly exposed by the Empress, Li Xian could not help but blush slightly. He said, "I can't hide anything from you, Mother. I actually asked Li Yi to draw this portrait. I also asked him to make the perfume." "Li? Is he the miraculous person who cured my depression?" the Empress asked in surprise. She was vaguely familiar with this name. After thinking for a while, she immediately thought of who it was. After all, she was deeply troubled by her depression. She still had a deep impression of the miraculous person who cured her. "That's him." Li Xian nodded and said, "Illness of stagnation, a miraculous person? What's going on?" the Empress asked with a hint of confusion on her face. Ning Wang, who had been by Wang Fei's side all this time, finally smiled and spoke. "A few days ago, Wang Fei was ill with a strange illness. Even the imperial doctors sent by the palace were helpless. Fortunately, an extraordinary person offered a good prescription and Wang Fei's illness was cured." "There's such a thing?" Hearing this, the Empress stood up and said, "This person should be heavily rewarded." "Don't worry, Your Highness. I've already rewarded him heavily," Prince Ning said with a smile. The prince's residence only wanted 50% of the profits from the Ruidu and liquor business. Just for the sake of this matter, it could be said that he had gained a great advantage. Not only does he know medicine, but he also has such painting skills. He can be considered an extraordinary person. The Empress looked at the portrait and said, "With just a few portraits he can draw such charm. He is more than qualified to be a court painter. If Your Highness likes it, I can ask him to paint one for Your Highness. As for becoming a court painter, it's not necessary." Li Xian was really worried that the Empress would make Li Yi into the palace as a royal painter. If that was the case, his life would undoubtedly be less interesting. He hurriedly said this and quickly ran out. The Empress had wanted to stop him, but her eyes glanced and saw the perfume and portrait in Ning Wang Fei's hands. She just raised her hand and put it back down. "All right, you don't have to accompany me. Tonight is sister's birthday. You two probably have to show your faces outside." After a while, Ning Wang and Ning Wang Fei sent the Empress to the inner hall. Tonight, the prince's residence was very lively. Li Yi finally found a secluded garden. He held a plate of pastries in one hand and a pot of fruit wine in the other as he walked towards a pavilion in the depths of the garden. Choosing to come here tonight was not a correct decision. Other than Li Xian, the only other person he knew was that Professor Feng. If he went out now, he would probably be scolded by that person who liked to lecture others. It was quieter here. Li Yi sat down in the pavilion and ate the pastries and drank the fruit wine. He could faintly hear someone singing. The voice was very pleasant to listen to. In this era, it seemed that any banquet would have dance music to add to the fun. Li Yi had just seen a group of people gathered there. Before he could go over to join in the fun, he had encountered Professor Feng. After being called brat twice, he didn't have any thoughts of going over. When he came over just now, the banquet outside had just started. He wasn't in the mood to face a table of strangers. He ate something to fill his stomach and then said goodbye to Li Xian before going back to sleep. He had eaten too many pastries and was extremely greasy. The fruit wine tasted good and he drank a mouthful to relieve the greasiness. Not long after he put down the wine pot, he suddenly heard footsteps behind him. The person who was walking towards the pavilion didn't seem to realize that there was someone in such a secluded corner. The old figure behind the man said in a low voice, "My lord, should we chase him away?" The old man didn't lower his voice. Li Yi, who was sitting in the pavilion, frowned. Who was this old man? He was so overbearing. Did he think the prince's residence was his home? Li Yi hadn't seen Prince Ning before, but he had seen his portrait. The man was slightly older than Prince Ning. Obviously, he wasn't the owner of the prince's residence. However, those who appeared in the prince's residence tonight were almost all people of status. The person who came might be a high-ranking official. He was just a small county officer and probably couldn't afford to offend him. He prepared to stand up and leave. Unfortunately, there was still half a plate of pastries left. When he went back, he would probably have to personally make it himself. Should he eat egg-fried rice or noodles? This was a dilemma. It was also at this time that the man waved his hand and said, "No need." He walked up to the pavilion and sat down on the other side. He only glanced lightly at Li Yi and didn't speak. He seemed to have something on his mind as he stared at the lights outside the shadows of the trees in a daze. Occasionally, the loud voices of young people could be heard from there. Most of them were talking about state affairs. It was faintly discernible. These were the new scholars of Qingyun Fu. They only had to wait for the court to appoint them before they could truly step onto the official path. Perhaps after a few years, some of them would also become important officials in the court. As the man was thinking about these things, he suddenly felt something. He turned his head and saw the young man hand over the plate of pastries. "Want a piece?" Li Yi looked at him and raised his eyebrows. Towards this high-ranking official who wasn't overbearing, Li Yi had some good feelings. Seeing the young man in front of him pick up a piece of pastry and throw it into his mouth, the middle-aged man was startled for a moment. Then he smiled and reached out his hand. "This pastry tastes good, but if you eat too much you'll get sick of it. It's best to go outside and steal. Bring me a jug of wine." This high-ranking official seemed to be very approachable. Li Yi kindly reminded him. The middle-aged man only ate a piece of pastry, but he seemed to be interested in the young man in front of him. Seeing that he was dressed like a scholar, he asked, "Are you this year's new scholar?" I'm ashamed. I've been studying for a few years and I'm only an elementary scholar." Li Yi said lightly, but his face didn't show the slightest hint of shame. Hearing this, the man was a little confused. It was strange for an elementary scholar to appear on such an occasion, but he didn't mind. Out of habit, he said a few words of encouragement. "You're still young, there's no need to be ashamed. If you study hard, you may be able to graduate and serve the country. The world's scholars are the foundation of a country. Even if you can't become a scholar, you can still become a jurin and have the qualifications to be an official." The scholars are the foundation of a country? Li Yi didn't mind that the high-ranking official was lecturing him like Professor Feng. He casually asked, "Shouldn't the foundation of a country be its people? Didn't your teacher teach you that when you were young?" After he said that, he realized that although this world's trajectory was similar to China's, there were often huge differences in the details. This famous saying in his previous world might not be used in this world. "What do you mean?" The man frowned and looked at him. "The people are the water, the king is the boat. Water can carry the boat, it can also..." Li Yi said half a sentence and stopped. The man was listening curiously, but when he saw Li Yi suddenly stop, he raised his head and asked, "Can also what?" "Water can carry the boat, it can also cook porridge." Li Yi's stomach growled. He said awkwardly, "Do you have porridge? I'm hungry." Chapter 163. It turned out that it was easy to be a high-ranking official. In a short while, a few dishes as well as the fragrant white fungus and lotus seed porridge were placed on the stone table in the pavilion. Continue. The dishes were already on the table. The middle-aged man looked at him and urged him. What was I talking about? Li Yi was hungry, so he did not stand on ceremony. He drank a few mouthfuls of porridge and said, "Oh yes, I remember. Speaking of porridge, this white fungus and lotus seed porridge is a bit overcooked. The white fungus is all cooked and it affects the taste. However, these dishes are not bad. Do you want to try?" The middle-aged man was speechless. "Yes, you are right. This porridge is indeed overcooked." The middle-aged man drank a few mouthfuls of porridge and reached an agreement with Li Yi on this matter. The old man, who was quietly standing behind the man, could not help but twitch when he heard this. The emperor of a country went out incognito without the officials of the court, just to discuss the problem of cooking porridge? It would only take 1 day to travel from the capital to Qing and prefecture by water. However, if he wanted to return to the palace, it would take at least 6 or 7 days. This time he did not go out with great fanfare and did not have a large entourage. However, in order to protect the emperor and her ladyship, almost all the aces in the palace were sent out. Naturally, the journey would not be fast. If the emperor's identity was accidentally exposed, the imperial censors would be very busy when they returned to the court. Time was of the essence. Returning to the palace was the most important thing. What problem was there to discuss? Of course, these words could only be thought in his heart. He could not say it out loud. Water can carry a boat, but it can also overturn it. Well said. Hearing such an argument from a scholar really surprised him. If the people could live and work in peace, eat their fill and wear warm clothes, who would have nothing better to do and run over to rebel? They would be angry with whoever rebelled. However, if they did not even have enough to eat, other than rebelling, there would be nothing else to do. This was the logic. Now that the Confucians were ruling the country, they naturally protected the interests of the Confucians, which was the interests of the aristocratic families and the rulers. As for the common people at the bottom of the hierarchy, they were far from paying enough attention to them. Since he had nothing to do, it was good to have someone to chat with to relieve his boredom. Although the person in front of him might be a high-ranking official, what he said was not outrageous. Whether the other party listened to him or not, Li Yi did not really care. Ruling a big country is like cooking a small fish. In short, don't torment the people and nothing big will happen. Li Yi poked at a fish on the table. Just like this fish. If you flip it too many times, the meat will fall apart and it won't taste good anymore. Ruling a great country is like cooking a small dish. Hearing this again, the man's eyes lit up. When he was about to continue asking, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Let's eat. Let's not talk about these useless things." Useless things? This was the first time he heard someone say that the way of ruling a country was useless. The man was stunned. He then narrowed his eyes and looked at the young man in front of him. He was not angry. Instead, he was more curious about the young man. Although he did not speak much, every word he said was a gem. Even some of his words seemed crude, but when he thought about it carefully, there was some truth in them. In the past 2 years, our Jing kingdom has been plagued by disasters. The drought has just passed and the south has been hit by floods. In the desolate northwest, bandits have run amok. Moreover, our evil neighbor, the Qi kingdom, has repeatedly invaded our borders. There are rumors among the people that it is because the current emperor has lost his virtue that so many bad things have happened. Nonsense. Before the middle-aged man could finish his words, he was interrupted by Li Yi. What does natural and man-made disasters have to do with the emperor? According to what you said, if I accidentally fell when I went out in the morning, can I also blame it on the emperor's loss of virtue? Aside from the fact that he was inexplicably made a county lieutenant, which caused Li Yi to have some complaints about the current emperor, he had a good impression of him in other aspects. After all, from the various government decrees carried out in the Jing kingdom, His Majesty did not seem to be a fatuous ruler. Just the temporary exemption of taxes in Qing and Prefecture and the surrounding cities was enough to make even Li Yi remember his kindness. The elder behind the man wanted to say, presumptuous. How dare he use such an indecent word in front of the current emperor? However, before he could say anything, His Majesty waved his hand behind him. After glaring angrily at the young man, he kept his mouth shut. Well said. Naturally, Li Yi did not know that his invisible flattery had hit the heart of the man in front of him. It was not easy to be an emperor these days. Within the borders of the Jing kingdom, wherever there was a disaster, where there was a bandit, where strange things happened, they were all blamed on the emperor. As an emperor, he was really wronged. Although the young scholar's words were unpleasant to hear, they made him feel good all over. If it was not for his status, even he would have scolded him to his heart's content. In an instant, when he looked at the young man again, his eyes were full of admiration. Young man, you have ideas, you have insight, you can be of great use. Although the imperial examination was still the most common and important way for scholars to enter the official career, the country was in urgent need of talents and would not block all paths. If there were truly outstanding talents in a certain area, they could be recommended by the local officials, examined by the Ministry of Appointments, and then presented to the emperor. It was not impossible to make an exception and hire them. At this moment, towards the young man in front of him, he clearly had such thoughts. Of course, with his status, there was no need for the local officials to recommend him. After the examination by the Ministry of Appointments, it was only a matter of a word for him to be promoted. At such a young age, you do have some real talent. Although you are only an elementary scholar, it is not a big deal. The imperial court will never let talents go to waste. If you are interested, I can recommend you to the imperial court. I think it is possible to get you an official position. What do you think? The middle-aged man looked at Li Yi and said with a smile. He really cherished talents. After a few words, he was very much in agreement with Zhou Bao's views on governance. Of course, he did not exclude the fact that Zhou Bao had said "bullsh*" just now, which added a lot of points in his heart. Since he was a talent, he should be used by the country. The ruler and the officials should work together to build a harmonious and beautiful country. Letting talents go to waste. This was not something a wise ruler would do. Li Yi's hand that had just stretched out froze in midair, and his face was a little dazed. This scene, it seemed a little familiar. This seemed to be the second time. It was just a casual chat. Was there a need to be so nervous? Indeed, a loose tongue causes trouble. If he had known earlier, he would not have said those words just now. Slowly putting down his chopsticks, he said with a face full of regret, "To tell you the truth, I have been suffering from a chronic illness since I was young." Chapter 164. How come I have never heard of a chronic illness that prevents one from becoming an official? Seeing the young scholar put down his chopsticks and leave, the middle-aged man said with a smile. This person used such a clumsy excuse to brush off His Majesty. How despicable. The old man's dark voice floated out. Attempting to deceive the emperor, what is the punishment? According to the law, he should be beheaded. The old man's voice paused and then he said, however, ignorance is not a crime. He did not know His Majesty's identity, so he can be given a lighter sentence. Changda, you have a sharp tongue but a soft heart. Your bad habit hasn't changed in decades, the middle-aged man said with a smile. A hint of warmth appeared on the old man's cold face. He had watched His Majesty grow up. From the time he was a toddler learning to speak to the time he became a little prince and was made crown prince by the late emperor. Then he personally watched him ascend to the throne. It had been decades. It was said that the emperor was heartless, but he knew very well that the current emperor valued relationships and was a rare wise ruler. The relationship between the two seemed to be master and servant, but it was better than that. Let's go. After a walk, my chest doesn't feel so tight anymore. Go and investigate that young man just now. He's so young, but he doesn't want to serve the country and wants to be a hermit. However, although his personality still needs to be polished, he has potential, the middle-aged man said with a smile and walked outside with his hands behind his back. The old man followed closely behind. As the two of them left, countless silhouettes flickered in the surrounding darkness, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After strolling out of the garden, he was still slightly hungry. Li felt regret. If he had known that this high-ranking official would be the same as Professor Feng and make him an official in the end, he wouldn't have said so much just now. Otherwise he wouldn't have been so hungry. He only drank half a bowl of porridge and only ate a few mouthfuls. It was a pity. Shaking his head, he decided to go say goodbye to Zhou Xian and go back to sleep early. At this time, not far away around a wide pavilion, there was a lively scene of laughter and toasting. Most of the people gathered here were scholars. At this time of turbulence, thanks to Prince Ning's invitation, they gathered together to brainstorm and discuss the affairs of the country using the opportunity of the Wangfei's birthday banquet. Perhaps they could really come up with a good solution. Other than the officials from Qing and Prefecture who had been invited, the new Jinshi who had graduated from Qing and Prefecture this year were all included. These people were the future pillars of the country. Once the court officially appointed them, they would immediately take up their posts and officially become civil servants of the Jing kingdom. The reason why he had invited them tonight was also to give them some guidance. Many of the new Jinshi were high-spirited and had not yet been tempered by the cruel reality. They were filled with the desire to serve the country and finally had a chance to express their ideals and ambitions. Using this opportunity, they would point out the country, encourage writing, and when they got excited they would write a poem. It seemed that if they didn't do this, they wouldn't be able to express their concern for the country and the people. In the pavilion, there were courtesans and dancers to add to the fun. Every time someone wrote a poem, they would go up and sing it. On an occasion like tonight, no matter if the poem was good or not, no one would give it a bad review. Of course, poetry was also within the scope of the examination. Those who were able to pass the Jinshi exam would write poems that weren't too bad. At this time, in a remote corner of the venue, County Magistrate Lu sat alone on an empty table and drank by himself. He seemed a little lonely and desolate. Magistrate Dong and a few other officials sat in the middle, surrounded by the stars. As a small attendant of the county magistrate, he was too embarrassed to join them. He could only sit alone in the corner and watch the new Jinshi perform. He thought back to the days when he was high-spirited and his eyes were blurred. The wine in the mansion was good, and County Magistrate Lu was a little tipsy unconsciously. Slightly tilting his head, he saw a familiar figure turning out of a garden and walking straight towards him. County Magistrate Li. County Magistrate Lu was puzzled. He didn't know why County Magistrate Li went there alone. He stood up and was ready to greet him when he came. In the mansion tonight, both of them were alone and they felt that they were in the same boat. Just as he put down the wine cup and stood up from his seat, he saw two figures walking out behind County Magistrate Li. The one walking in front was a middle-aged man with an ordinary look, but he had a dignified air of being in a high position for a long time. With the help of the lamplight, County Magistrate Lu could only vaguely see his face, but it was this glance that made his legs go soft, and he quivered and instantly sober up. Although he had only seen this face once in more than 10 years for County Magistrate Lu, he would never forget this face for the rest of his life. Meeting the Emperor in the Golden Palace was the most glorious moment of County Magistrate Lu's life. Who could forget the Emperor's face? Who dared to forget it? Thank you for the meal. As soon as Li Yi walked out of the garden, he saw the high-ranking official and the gloomy old man following him. He waved his hand casually and walked in the opposite direction. He didn't mention the matter of making him an official again and continued to walk forward. Where should I find Zhou Xian? Seeing this scene, County Magistrate Lu trembled and sat back in his seat again. As for greeting County Magistrate Li, he didn't even dare to think about it. He even treated the Emperor so casually. How could he, County Magistrate Lu, be qualified? It was not easy to find Zhou Xian in such a large mansion, and it didn't seem good to leave without saying goodbye. When Li Yi was thinking of finding someone to bring him a message and go back to sleep, a figure came to him. It was a young woman. The woman was extremely beautiful. She wore a silk dress without any makeup. Her eyebrows were distant and her eyes were like autumn water. She was indeed a peerless beauty. Puff. Seeing this peerless beauty, Li Yi couldn't help laughing for a moment. What are you laughing at? A trace of blush appeared on the woman's face, and then she became angry and said, What are you laughing at? I'm not laughing. Li Yi looked serious, but the next moment he couldn't help laughing again. The way you dress, it's really. The anger on the woman's face deepened. She reached for her waist out of habit, only to realize that she had changed her attire today. She did not carry her saber either. She waved her fist at Li Yi and said, "I dare you to laugh again." Although it was normal for a woman to dress like this, Li Yi was used to her wearing the police uniform. He didn't see her as a woman from the bottom of his heart. At this moment she stood in front of him in a different outfit and he was really not used to it. However, looking at her clenched fist, Li Yi knew that if he continued to laugh like this, something bad would happen. He hurriedly stopped laughing and said, "I won't laugh, I won't laugh. If you see Zhou Xian later, remember to tell him that I'm going back first. Goodbye, ha." Seeing that the situation was not good, Li Yi slipped away. Mingzu clenched her fist and looked at him with some shame and anger. Business was more important, so she didn't care and strode forward. "Why can you sing other people's lyrics but not mine? Do you look down on me?" When passing through the place where the scholars gathered, an angry voice came to his ears. Li Yi looked in that direction in surprise and shook his head. He still felt that it was more important to go home and sleep, so he didn't plan to join in the fun. When he was about to leave, he heard the next voice and paused. Chapter 165. Young master, you misunderstand. I have no such intentions. It is just that I am not feeling well today and my singing has been greatly affected. If I continue, I fear I will disturb the mood of all the young masters. The beautiful girl bowed and said apologetically, "What do you mean by not feeling well? Don't use this excuse to brush me off." A young man stood up from his seat and said impatiently, "How come I don't see anything wrong with you? If you're asked to sing, then sing. Today all the officials and your peers are present. If you don't sing, it will ruin everyone's mood." At this time he was annoyed that this performer did not know how to appreciate favors. It was because he had seen how good she was at singing that he had asked her to sing his best work. He hadn't thought that she would sing someone else's work so straightforwardly and readily. When it came to him, she made excuses. This was clearly making him lose face in front of all his peers and all the officials. The beautiful girl had a difficult expression. Today was Wang Fei's birthday banquet. All the famous performers and singers of the prefectural city had been invited to sing and dance. They could not refuse. Even though she was on her period, had a cold and was not feeling well, she didn't dare to disobey. But at this time the feeling of discomfort was getting worse. Her head was dizzy and she couldn't sing no matter how good she was. It was not suitable for her to speak. But she knew that none of the people present tonight could be offended by a small performer like her. Gritting her teeth, she prepared to nod and agree when a laughing voice came from the side. A singer walked over and said with a smile, "Master Cui, you don't know, but Ruoqing is not feeling well today. If Master Cui doesn't mind, how about I sing this song?" There was gratitude in Wan Ruoqing's eyes as she looked at the singer. She was also skilled in singing and had some fame in Qing and Fu. The two of them did not have a close relationship. She had not thought that she would come forward to help her out at a time like this. "Who do you think you are?" The Cui man glanced at her coldly and turned to look at Wan Ruoqing. In a cold voice he said, "You really won't sing?" The woman trembled under his glare. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything in the end. She was only a lowly songstress, while the other was an outstanding talent among the scholars of Qing and Fu. Naturally, she did not dare to say anything more. After casting an apologetic look at Wan Ruoqing, he quietly retreated. They were already used to such a scene. The singers and actors had expressions of grief and indignation on their faces, but they could only lower their heads in silence. "You really don't want to sing?" When the man from the Cui clan said this, he raised his voice slightly. Many people in the surroundings stopped talking and looked over in puzzlement. What happened to Brother Yan Xian? Strange, why is Brother Yan Xian making things difficult for a performer? He drank quite a bit just now. I'm afraid he's a little drunk now. There were also some people who were closer and knew the whole story. They gave a simple explanation. Everyone guessed that Cui Yanqin was really drunk tonight for making things difficult for an actor for no reason. Speaking of which, the wine in the manor was really good. Scholars couldn't live without wine. All of them had amazing alcohol tolerance, but they didn't dare to drink too much tonight because the wine was too strong. Normally, they would raise their cups and drink to their heart's content, but tonight, they were worried that they would get drunk and cause trouble. Everyone looked at the two of them with an expression of interest, but no one went up to mediate. A mere performer, a lowly girl, if she was in trouble then she was in trouble. No one would take it to heart. Brother Xianxia, I'm afraid it's not appropriate to make things difficult for a weak girl like this. Wan Ruoqing was about to grit her teeth and agree when a luxuriously dressed young man walked out of the crowd and walked over. Brother Xian, what is the meaning of this? Cui Yanxin looked at the young man coming over and asked with a frown. He and Xianxia, and were both scholars of Qing and Fu who had passed the exams this year. In the past they hadn't interacted much. Tonight they had spoken a few words. Presumably he wasn't someone who liked to meddle in other people's business. Why was he standing up for this performer? The young man smiled and said, Brother Xianxia, don't be angry. Miss Ruoqing is an old friend of Xian's. Cui Yanxin was stunned for a moment. After the two of them looked at each other, Cui Yanxin looked at him strangely and said with a smile, I really didn't expect Brother Xian to be such a sentimental person. To tell you the truth, Brother Xianxia, I've admired Miss Ruoqing for a long time. This time when I return home after graduating, I want to help her get rid of her lowly status and take her back. The young man smiled and cupped his hands at Cui Yanxin. If that's the case, I naturally won't make things difficult for her. Cui Yanxin nodded. Since the other had already spoken, he naturally wouldn't insist. He turned his head to look at the performer and said, Tonight, there are many lords and people of the same age present. Since Brother Xian is interested, why don't you agree? Can be considered as a witness. He saw Jiang Zian's intentions. At this time he intended to speak up to help him. Xianxian's words make sense. If Brother Xian stands up for a woman, it will be a story to be told. Yes. Tonight there are so many witnesses. He won't be allowed to go back on his words in the future. Just agree. In an instant, countless scholars stood up and said. They were all Xianxia and naturally couldn't legally marry a lowly woman, but they could still take her as a concubine. In reality, such things were not uncommon among them. The officials who were a little further away had long become accustomed to this. Even the favored concubines of their families used to be famous performers in Qing and prefecture or prostitutes who had been in the limelight for a while. This kind of atmosphere was quite prevalent among the literati. At this time, the resentment on the faces of the other singers and performers had long disappeared. They looked at Wan Ruoqing with eyes full of envy. For these lowly women, compared to aging and dying alone, this was probably the best ending in this life. That young man had become a Xianxia at a young age and had a promising future. Even if she became his concubine, it would not be a disgrace. Instead, it would be a great blessing. Jiang Zian looked at the beautiful woman with a smile and said softly, Ruoqing, what do you think? Hearing this, Ruoqing looked up at him with a smile on her face. She said, Master Jiang, Ruoqing appreciates your kindness, but I'm sorry. The feeling of discomfort was getting stronger and stronger. She resisted the dizziness and picked up a piece of rice paper with Cui Yanxin's new lyrics written on it. After bowing slightly to Jiang Zian, she walked toward the pavilion without looking back. Seeing this, everyone was slightly stunned. She would rather choose to sing than be Jiang Zian's concubine? When the singers and performers saw this, some regret appeared on their faces. If it had been them, they would have agreed without hesitation. The smile on Jiang Zian's face froze. After a while he smiled again and said, it seems that it was Xian's wishful thinking. Being rejected in front of so many people had already caused him to lose a lot of face. However, even though he was extremely furious in his heart, he did not reveal the slightest bit of displeasure. Otherwise, it would only make others think that he was too narrow-minded. Cui Yanxin was a little surprised by this, but he did not care too much. After all, Jiang Zian's matter had nothing to do with him. Since the performer went up to sing, his original purpose had been achieved. After a short surprise, everyone stopped thinking about this matter and turned to discuss Cui Yanxin's lyrics just now. I just saw Xianxian's lyrics. It is a rare piece of work. When the performer sings, Brother Xianxian will be in the limelight again. With the world in your heart you can't eat and sleep well. You are worried about the country and the people. Brother Xianxian is really a role model for us. Hearing this, Cui Yanxin's face showed a little pride. Tonight he was in a good state of mind, so he wrote such a poem. He wanted to leave a good impression in front of everyone. The performer's singing was good and he was afraid that he would add a lot of color to the lyrics. Before Wan Ruoqing reached the pavilion, the feeling of dizziness became more and more intense. When she stepped on the steps, she accidentally stepped on air, staggered and almost fell. Right at this moment, a pair of strong hands supported her shoulders. She was startled and quickly pulled away. When she turned her head and saw a familiar face, her heart finally calmed down. "Are you okay?" The young man looked at her with some worry. "I'm fine." Wan Ruoqing resisted the discomfort and gently shook her head. The young man looked at her pale face and remembered what he had just seen outside. He frowned and took the rice paper from her hand. After glancing at it, he crumpled it into a ball and threw it on the ground. "What the hell is this?" A faint, disdainful voice was clearly heard by everyone present. Chapter 166. She had worn the uniform of a bailiff for a long time and then changed into a woman's dress. It wasn't just Li Yi who found it strange, even Mingzu herself wasn't used to it. However, it was clearly inappropriate to wear the uniform of a bailiff at an occasion like tonight. She wore the awkward clothes and brushed past Li Yi. She walked to the end of the road and then turned back from the other side. She was clearly familiar with Ning Wangfu. She turned back and walked for a while before going up to an exquisite little building. The little building had 2 floors. Walking up the stairs, the middle-aged man who had just chatted with Li Yi sat down in a room by the window on the 2nd floor. The eunuch called Changde stood silently behind him. "Imperial brother." "Your Majesty." On the other side, Ning Wang and Ning Wangfei respectfully bowed to him. "There are no outsiders here, there is no need for such formalities in private." The current emperor, the man called Li Hong, chuckled as he sat down. At this moment he was in a good mood. Just now, when the young man did not know his identity and casually chatted with him for a while, he felt that no etiquette or flattery could compare to hearing the fart from the young man. As the two sat down, a voice came from the door. "Princess, His Majesty and Yang Yang are waiting for you inside." "Mingzu, come in." The female walked into the room. The empress was the first to stand and wave at her. "Fuhuangmuhu." Mingzu walked over and first bowed to the two. Then she said to Ning Wang and Ning Wangfei, "Mingzu greets Wang Shu Yinyang. Come and sit." Ning Wangfei stood and held her hand, letting him sit between her and the empress. She said with a smile, "This child, you haven't come to the Wang Fu to visit Yinyang in these months. When you were young, you were the one who bothered Yinyang the most." "I was afraid of causing trouble for Yinyang and Wang Shu," Mingzu said with a smile. "What trouble? Are you afraid that the Wang Fu will mistreat you?" Ning Wangfei was still holding his hand, a hint of blame in her eyes. "Why didn't you just stay in the palace? Why did you come here to be a bailiff? Since ancient times, when has a princess ever been a bailiff?" Ning Wangfei's words made her feel somewhat at a loss. Just at this time another person strode in. Li Xian didn't find Li Yi in the Wang Fu and could only return helplessly. A servant passed on Ning Wang's words, telling him to come to this little building, so he immediately rushed over. Suddenly seeing the familiar middle-aged man on the main seat, Li Xian was stunned for a moment, then immediately bowed again. "Xianer greets Uncle Huang." Get up, come to Uncle Emperor." Jing Emperor waved his hand and Li Xian had to sit down obediently. After he sat down, the Empress seemed to think of something. She turned to look at Mingzu with dissatisfaction and said, "You child, who told you to secretly bring wine to father? Don't you know that your father has asthma and can't drink? And Changde, I told you to look at His Majesty and you just look at him like this? Don't think that I don't know that without you, the wine would not have reached His Majesty's hands. This old servant knows his mistake." The old man behind Jing Emperor heard this and immediately knelt down. "Get up, Xin is also at fault in this matter. Let's not mention it anymore." Jing Emperor waved his hand and suddenly sniffed. He asked in confusion, "Where is the fragrance coming from?" Since he didn't want to mention this matter again, the Empress didn't say anything more. She followed his topic and said with a smile, "Your Majesty doesn't know, this thing is called perfume. It was given to me by Xian just now." "Perfume?" Jing Emperor's face was slightly surprised. Before he could speak, a trace of doubt appeared on his face again. He turned to look out of the window. Just at that moment, the originally noisy atmosphere outside suddenly became quiet. Below the small building was a spacious area. It was the place where the officials discussed the affairs of the state tonight. Sitting on the upper floor, one could hear a few words. They were used to the noisy arguments. Now that it had suddenly become quiet, it naturally made one suspicious. The old eunuch named Changda had already walked to the window. When he looked down from the window, a trace of surprise appeared on his old face. It's him. After a while, Jing Emperor stood up from his seat and walked to the window. When he saw the young figure below, he couldn't help but smile. It's him. Seeing the expression on Jing Emperor's face, Prince Ning and Li Xian also walked over with some doubts. What the hell? The young man crumpled Cui Yanxin's poem into a ball and threw it on the ground like a piece of scrap paper. Coupled with the mocking and disdainful expression on his face, the scholars who were waiting for the performer to sing the poem were clearly stunned where they stood. Arrogant, too arrogant. The next moment such a thought emerged in their minds. Cui Yanxin's face had already turned red. He strode over and looked coldly at the guy who came out of nowhere. He gritted his teeth and asked, "What did you say?" This person's action just now was obviously looking down on his proud work. This was an unbearable insult for a scholar who valued talent very much. If he let him go like this, today's matter would definitely become a stain on Cui Yanxin's life. Him? Isn't this the person who was reprimanded by Professor Feng just now? Yanxin once had a grudge against him? Many people present had just seen the scene of Professor Feng's anger, and someone instantly recognized Li Yi. I say, don't take out such a clumsy work to show off. You still want him to sing it. It's not your fault that the poem is bad, but it's your fault that it tortures others' ears when you sing it. Li Yi had never had a good impression of this so-called scholar who looked gentle on the surface but was actually sanctimonious. It was the same with Xianxia, and it was the same with this man surnamed Cui. After studying for a few years, he thought that he was the most talented person in the world. He was condescending, putting on a high and mighty appearance, bullying a woman, and everyone else just watched coldly from the side. In the future, the Jing kingdom would be governed by such a person, so why would it not perish? Of course, the most important point was that the person he bullied was someone Li Yi knew, and he often missed the taste of the two osmanthus cakes she made. Arrogant. His proud work was said to be worthless, especially the sentence, "It's not your fault that the poem is bad, but it's your fault that it tortures others' ears when you sing it." This sentence almost made Cui Yanxin spit out a mouthful of old blood. There was not a single curse word in the whole sentence, but when it was put together, Cui Yanxin had the urge to strangle the person in front of him. He shouted angrily, "Arrogant person, what good poem can you come up with? Take it out for everyone to see. Today all the officials are here. If you can't come up with a good poem and insult your peers for no reason, I will ask all the officials to report you in front of His Majesty." At this moment, Cui Yanxin was also angry and depressed. He did not know the person in front of him at all and thought he was some new scholar. Being insulted like this with his personality, of course he would not let it go. He was extremely confident in his poem, and in a moment of impulse he said these words. In the distance, a few local officials of Qing and also walked over. Professor Feng was walking at the front, and before he had even stopped, he heard Cui Yanxin's words. When he raised his head to look at the person in front of him, he staggered and almost fell. Yanxin. Cui Yanxin was someone he thought highly of, and he had not let him down in this imperial examination. He had obtained the title of scholar, and he really did not want to see Cui Yanxin be humiliated again. These days he had been preparing for the imperial examination in the capital, and did not know anything about the recent events in Qing and prefecture. Naturally, he did not understand that competing in poetry with the young man in front of him was practically asking to be humiliated. "Master Feng, I have made up my mind. Today I will not tolerate this humiliation." Cui Yanxin waved his sleeve and said with a face full of determination. Chapter 167. It's not your fault that you wrote poorly, but it's your fault for tormenting people's ears when you sing it. Ah, you really didn't let me down. The original noise was gone, and the dialogue between Li Yi and Cui Yanxin was clearly heard. Li Xian couldn't help laughing. Among the people he knew, Li Yi was the first one who could scold people to such a high degree. There were a large number of palace masters around the small building. Perhaps one of the servants carrying the dishes was a powerful figure who was hiding his strength. Chief Chamberlain Changde had only mentioned a few words, and in a short time, someone had already reported what had happened word for word. Haha, you really know how to be protective of the fairer sex. Jing Di smiled and then seemed to think of something. He looked at Li Xian and asked, Little Xian also knows him? Li Xian nodded and said, replying to Imperial Uncle, his name is Li Yi and he is Little Xian's friend. Li. Hearing this name, Jing Di's face showed a trace of doubt. He always felt that he had heard of it somewhere. Imperial Father, Li Yi is the person who wrote rules for disciples. You just conferred him the title of County Lieutenant. Emingzu explained prettily on the side. As the ruler of a country, he was busy every day. Naturally, it was impossible for him to remember the name of a scholar. After she reminded him, he remembered that it seemed to be true. Li, is he the person who cured my sister's chronic illness? At this time, the Empress on the side also asked. Imperial Mother, it's him. Emingzi said. Even Jing Di did not expect that the interesting young man he met in the garden of the prince's mansion had such a deep relationship with the royal family. He already had a copy of the poem written by Cui Yanxin. After looking at it, he shook his head and said, it can be regarded as a good piece of work. I am afraid that it is difficult for that young man to write a better one. In his heart he admired Li Yi very much, but he did not understand his poetry. He hoped that he would win, but he also knew that the possibility was not high. Imperial brother guessed wrong this time. At this moment, Prince Ning smiled and stepped forward, saying, tonight even if Cui had chosen anyone here he might not have lost. But he chose Li Yi, so he can only humiliate himself. Because of Li Xian, he had specially sent someone to investigate Li Yi. Since he could be called the #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom by Su Lao Xuezheng, how could his talent in poetry be comparable to anyone? At this time the Empress also said, the birthday poem he wrote for my sister was not bad. I think he has some talent. Hearing that the Rui Dew and perfume were made by Li Yi, the two of them naturally wanted to see what kind of gift he presented today. Although they were slightly disappointed that he only gave a birthday poem, they had to admit that the poem and handwriting were excellent. Could it be that I've underestimated him? When Jing Di looked down in surprise, Mingzhu's eyes also stopped on Li Yi. Most of the time he was easy to get along with, but if he showed that kind of expression, it meant that someone was going to be unlucky. You should go and participate. He was already an adult, but he was still as childish as a naughty child. When he couldn't bully others, he went to complain to an adult. However, Cui Yanxin's words obviously did not scare Li Yi. If he had the ability, he should go and participate. It would be best if he could make him lose his position as a county officer. In the future he would definitely put 2 incense sticks in his house to thank him. You should go and participate. Participate. When Cui Yanxin heard this, he felt like he had punched cotton. He almost couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. He met a handsome man who didn't know any tricks. He couldn't use any of his methods. Li Ai. Wan Ruoqing's pale face showed panic. She hurriedly picked up the Xian paper that he had crumpled into a ball from the ground. I'm fine. I just want to sing another song. It's nothing. Li Yi standing out at this moment was equivalent to standing on the opposite side of all the officials. Moreover, there were so many officials here. If he offended them, his future career would really be ruined. Even though she was very grateful for Li Yi's bravery, she couldn't ruin his future for her own selfishness. After all, the road of an official career was really too important for a scholar. Li Yi once again crumpled the paper into a ball. After Wan Ruoqing saw his eyes, she didn't speak anymore. There was a trace of determination in her beautiful eyes. Among the officials of Qing'an Prefecture present, there were only 3 people who knew Li Yi. County Magistrate Lu, Professor Feng, and Magistrate Dong. County Magistrate Lu had, of course, investigated his subordinates. The results also surprised him. Suppressing Shenjiao, making Yang Yanzhou feel ashamed of his inferiority, and rising to the top among the scholars of Qing'an Prefecture. Professor Feng and Magistrate Dong had a deeper understanding of Li Yi. In terms of essays and poems, there really weren't many people present who could beat him. To be able to write such essays and poems, his talent in other areas must not be low. If it weren't for the fact that he had no interest in an official career, these people would most likely be suppressed by his brilliance in this year's imperial examinations. Brother, since you don't like Brother Yan Xian's poems, I'm afraid you already have something better in mind. Why don't you take it out for us to see? Zhou Xian walked out from the crowd and said with a smile. When his gaze swept past Ruoqing, a haze flashed across his eyes. No wonder she didn't agree. So she already had a lover. If you have any good poems, quickly take them out. Don't always hide them. After another voice sounded, everyone's gazes turned in that direction. Li Yi saw that the official who had come to Rui workshop with Professor Feng last time had spoken up before anyone else. He was slightly surprised. However, he also knew that if he didn't bring out something good today, it would be difficult to get through this. Miss Ruoqing, I'll have to trouble you to grind the ink, Li Yi said to Wan Ruoqing with a smile. Wan Ruoqing nodded and didn't move. The middle-aged official who had just spoken waved his sleeves and said, No need, I'll grind the ink for you myself. Magistrate Dong actually couldn't stand to see a few men make things difficult for a woman, but he wanted to see what kind of masterpiece Li Yi could write. After all, it was fine if he didn't do anything. Once he did, it would shake the entire poetry world in Qing'an Prefecture. Based on the current state of the poetry world, stirring things up like this often was beneficial. Li Yi watched as the minor official walked to the side and started to grind the ink. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This minor official didn't have a high position, but he liked to be in the limelight. The other officials hadn't said anything yet, but he was very proactive. His future would probably be like this. As for the others, they were guessing the meaning behind Magistrate Dong's actions. For a moment they weren't sure. He dipped the brush in the ink and glanced at Cui Yanxin. With a wave of his hand, a line of words flowed out like floating clouds in flowing water. Ugly slave. After the poem was written, some of the officials couldn't help but cry out when they saw the elegant handwriting. Good writing. Disregarding the content of the poem, just these 3 words were enough to make them look at the young man in front of them in a different light. Magistrate Dong and Professor Feng had seen Li Yi's writing before, so they weren't too surprised. However, when they saw the words written on the uppercase, they glanced at each other and then looked at Cui Yanxin at the same time. The youth doesn't know the taste of worry. Love to go up to the next level and forcefully express worry for the sake of composing a new poem. Cui Yanxin's poem just now roughly meant he had nothing to do and climbed a tall building alone. He worried about the country and the people, so much so that he couldn't eat or sleep peacefully. He grew thinner day by day. The whole poem could be summed up in one word: worry. Just now he didn't think there was anything wrong with this poem. Thinking about it now, it seemed a bit pretentious and unwell. After all, he looked full of energy and his body was wide and fat. He didn't look like he was growing thinner day by day. However, this was actually a common failing of many scholars. Normally they wouldn't pay attention to these things. If it was brought up, most people would probably be labeled as forcefully expressing worry for the sake of composing a new poem. But now that it was pointed out, naturally it couldn't be ignored. At this moment, Li Yi picked up his brush and finished writing the first and second part. The youth doesn't know the taste of worry. He loves to compose a new poem and forcefully expressing worry. Now that he knows the taste of worry, he wants to say it but doesn't. He wants to say it but doesn't. It's a cool autumn. Professor Feng raised his head and glanced at Li Yi. As a professor of the government school, how could he not see that this sorrow was not the sorrow of parting, but the sorrow of home and country? The layers of foreshadowing were tactful and subtle, but not revealing. It was already an excellent piece of writing. But the problem was, what was with the sorrow and anger revealed in the whole poem? How could he have such experience at such a young age? With his attainments in poetry, he definitely didn't write this poem to express his feelings, but to slap people in the face. Forcefully expressing worry for the sake of composing a new poem. Cui Yanxin had just finished worrying and he wrote such a sentence. Professor Feng sighed. He hoped that after tonight Cui Yanxin wouldn't be traumatized. At this moment, the expressions of the surrounding scholars also changed. They still had the ability to judge. This poem was indeed much better than Cui Yanxin's poem. Of course, the first sentence was more important. The youth doesn't know the taste of worry. He loves to compose a new poem and forcefully expresses worry. Wasn't the word young man referring to Cui Yanxin? Even they felt like they had been shot in the knees. Life had just begun. There were many things that had not been experienced. How could he have so many worries? Thinking of the poem he had written before, he couldn't help but feel a burning sensation on his face. At this moment Cui Yanxin's face was pale as he stared blankly at the paper. It was as if a sharp knife had pierced his heart. 2 streams of hot tears rolled down from his eyes. He raised his head to look at Li Yi. The sorrow and anger in his heart had reached the sky. Forcefully expressing worry for the sake of composing a new poem. Do you dare to be more ruthless? Cui Yanxin's vision darkened and he fainted on the spot. Chapter 168. In ancient times, there was a person who loved poetry as much as his life. When he was defeated in a poetry contest, he could not calm down and vomited 3 liters of blood. Today there was Cui Yanxin who was slapped in the face and fainted because of the phrase, writing a new poem to express sorrow. Although Cui Yanxin was not as good as the poet, if what happened tonight was spread out, he would become a laughing stock for many people. Many years later, perhaps the Zhuangyuan and Tanhua of the same year or even the emperor would be forgotten by the later generations. The name of Cui Yanxin would be known by everyone when the story of writing a new poem to express sorrow was mentioned. Cui Yanxin had just fainted due to a sudden surge of hot blood. There was no need to call for a doctor. Everyone helped him to a chair at the side, pinched his philtrum and slapped him. After a few breaths he slowly woke up. His face was still very red. No one knew whether it was because of anger or because of the slap. He pretended to be weak and did not dare to come closer. The damage of that poem to him was even more serious than dozens of floggings. From now on, Cui Yanxin would never be able to get rid of the hat of writing a new poem to express sorrow. At this time, the scholars and officials in the field immediately changed the way they looked at the young man. Unofficial history once said that in the Shu Han dynasty, Zhuge Kongming used his glib tongue to make Wang Longli speechless. Wang Longli was so ashamed that he fell off his horse and died. They thought it was just an exaggeration in the unofficial history. Seeing the situation today, they unconsciously believed it. Wan Ruoqing clenched the corner of her clothes tightly. She knew that Li Yi was good at poetry, but these people were also outstanding scholars and new scholars. They were far from those who claimed to be gifted scholars. However, when she saw that the young man fainted after Li Yi wrote a poem, she forgot the discomfort in her body. Her cherry lips slightly opened, but she could not say anything. The next moment, the surprise in her heart turned into nervousness and worry. Oh no. Li made that man faint in front of so many Jinshuren officials. They won't let this go easily. If they are displeased, then, she blamed herself. If she hadn't refused Cui Yanxin's request, this wouldn't have happened. While she was feeling extremely remorseful, Jiang Zian walked over with a gloomy face. Yan Xian and Your Excellency are both grand scholars of the same year. Don't you think Your Excellency's actions are a bit too much? 2 scholars who did not know each other would address each other as brother when they met. The word sir, on the other hand, carried a sense of alienation. The surrounding Jinshu also agreed, and almost all of them stood against Li Yi. Although he was targeting Cui Yanxin, he had scolded almost everyone present. It was a bit too much, and everyone was naturally dissatisfied with him. The officials present didn't care much about it. The officials present didn't care too much about this. They had been in the officialdom for many years and had experienced many things. It was common for scholars to be jealous of a woman. They asked themselves honestly, if that woman was also someone they liked and was scolded by Cui Yanxin like this, they would also do something indignant. Of course, Magistrate Dong's actions just now also made these old foxes not speak easily. Sorry sir, you guessed wrong. I am not a new Jinshu. Li Yi looked at him and said calmly. I. Jiang Zian's expression froze and the people around him were also shocked. Did he just say I? That was to say, the person in front of them had become an official before them. This year the imperial court hadn't appointed a new Jinshu, which meant he wasn't in the same year as them. Although they would walk this path sooner or later, it wasn't now. Everyone looked at Cui Yanxin. This was embarrassing. This time it was likely that the lords would not stand on their side. Wan Ruoqing looked at Li Yi, surprised and suspicious. When did he become an official? Was he lying to these people? It would be fine if it was on other occasions, but there were many officials here today and he couldn't fool them. County Magistrate Li, you are indeed worthy of your reputation as the first scholar. But what is this? I don't want to say, but it's a cool autumn day mean. Magistrate Dong looked at him and said with a smile, I'm curious. County Magistrate Li, why don't you say what you are worried about? You don't have to worry about offending anyone. The scholars of the Jing Kingdom won't be convicted based on their words. As soon as Magistrate Dong said this, everyone quieted down. His words revealed a lot of information. County Magistrate Li, the first scholar. And then there was the melancholy revealed in this poem. What was the melancholy? Magistrate Dong's words let go of Cui Yanxin's matter, and no one paid attention to Zhou Xian, who had just stood up. The new Jinshi wondered what was going on with this first scholar. Magistrate Dong seemed to be very familiar with him, and they wondered if what they did just now made Magistrate Dong unhappy. Magistrate Lu and some lower-ranked officials were probably thinking the same thing, but Professor Feng and the people around Magistrate Dong knew that Magistrate Dong's words weren't that simple. When they thought about the poem just now, they suddenly understood. Worried about the country, unable to say it, was he afraid of something? Could it be that he was using this to express his dissatisfaction with the peace faction that controlled the court's politics? At this time, the way Professor Feng looked at Li Yi changed for the first time. Using the past to contrast the present, using something to describe nothing and using nothing to describe something, he highlighted the word worry, and used this as a clue to spread out layer by layer. The feelings were sincere and tactful, and the words were shallow, but the meaning was deep. If it was a loyal official who was being pushed aside and had no way to serve the country, it was understandable that he would be worried. But he clearly had no desire to become an official, and he didn't want to be one, so why would he be worried? Reading carefully, what was revealed between the lines was that he saw the country's affairs deteriorating day by day, and he was powerless to do anything about it. He was not willing to become an official because he didn't want to be used by the peace faction. And the stubborn disease of not being an official was probably an excuse because of this. No wonder Magistrate Dong looked at him differently. If this was really the case, then his worries were all in Magistrate Dong's heart. It turned out that he had been wrong about him all along. A trace of red appeared on Professor Feng's face. This kind of feelings, he was far inferior to him. At this time, Li Yi was still depressed in his heart. Where did this small official come from, and why did he have so many problems? He didn't even know what he was worried about. There was only one purpose for taking out this poem, and that was to slap the face of the shameless Jinshi who even bullied girls. How could he think so much? Even Professor Feng didn't say anything. Why did an official keep interrupting? Didn't he see that Professor Feng's face was red with anger? County Magistrate Li, Magistrate Dong is asking you a question. Although County Magistrate Lu was very afraid of Li Yi's background, it wasn't good to keep Magistrate Dong there. Seeing this, he spoke in a low voice to remind him. What, Magistrate Dong? Li Yi was stunned. A small official suddenly became a magistrate. This change was too sudden and he couldn't react for a while. Chapter 169. I know that those who offend him will not have a good ending. Above the small building, Li Xian did not care that the emperor and empress were here and laughed without grace. It was the first time he had seen someone faint from anger with just one poem. At this moment he couldn't help but think of the mid-autumn poetry meet. In Mianxiu Garden, the so-called second scholar of Qing and Fu had provoked him. When Li Yi finished his poem, all those so-called scholars had stopped talking. It was a pity that he had not been there. Otherwise he would have felt it more deeply. He made up his mind that in the future he would ask for a few poems from Li Yi. When the time was right he would throw them out like this and shock everyone. That feeling would be extremely satisfying. Little Xian, don't be rude. The emperor and empress were still here. Seeing that he did not have the bearing of a prince, Ning Wang couldn't help but reprimand him. Wanting to speak but not wanting to speak, the sky is cold in autumn. Interesting. Changde sent someone to summon him. He didn't expect that the young man he met by chance in the garden would have so many entanglements with the royal family. Emperor Jing also admired him very much. He wanted to see what kind of expression he would have when he knew his true identity. After saying this, he suddenly furrowed his brows imperceptibly. The heavy feeling in his chest appeared again and his breathing became difficult. However, he experienced this kind of situation almost every few days, so he did not pay it too much attention right now. Downstairs, Li Yi had just learned from County Magistrate Lu that the curious little official just now was the Qing and prefectural magistrate. After a moment of shock, he composed himself and bowed. Sir Prefectural Magistrate, I have nothing to worry about. I was just casually lamenting. Casually lamenting? Hearing this, Cui Yanxin felt his blood boil again. Even when Magistrate Dong heard this, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. Last time he didn't reveal his identity, so he casually brushed him off. But this time, in front of all the officials, did he dare to be more serious? Just as Magistrate Dong was about to speak again, a servant from the manor came over and said, Li, His Highness invites you. The Wang Yi that the servants of the Wang Fu mentioned was naturally Ning Wang. When the officials heard this, they were all stunned. Why did the prince invite County Magistrate Li? Then they realized another problem. How could a small county officer be qualified to attend the princess's birthday banquet? Even Prefectural Magistrate Dong was slightly surprised by this matter. The emperor had personally written the title, the princess and Ning Wang both treated him. Was this County Magistrate Li not simple? Only County Magistrate Lu didn't feel strange at all. What was Ning Wang? Even if the servant had said, His Majesty invites him, he wouldn't have been surprised. After all, he had witnessed that scene with his own eyes. Why did Prince Ning invite me? As the person in question, Li Yi was also at a complete loss. This little one doesn't know. Li, hurry up and go with this little one. Don't let His Highness wait for too long. The servant urged. Li Yi turned his head to look at Wan Ruoqing. Before he spoke, Magistrate Dong waved his hand and said, Hurry up and go. I promise that after you leave, no one will make things difficult for this girl. Since Miss Ruoqing is not feeling well, you should go back and rest early. The words of the prefectural magistrate were very credible. Li Yi said to Wan Ruoqing and then left with the servant. On the way, he was still thinking, could it be that Li Xian has been thinking too much recently and Ning Wang wants to get even with me? After thinking about it, he felt it was unlikely. After all, after countless tests, he was very confident about Li Xian's mental endurance. If he couldn't figure it out, he wouldn't think about it. After all, he had saved the princess. As a prince, he shouldn't be ungrateful and bite the hand that feeds him. Li, His Highness is upstairs. Go up by yourself. The servant brought him around. Li Yi looked at the small building strangely, then looked at the servant again. Suddenly, the look in his eyes became a little strange. This small building was clearly the one behind them. Just now he could have entered from the front door if he turned around. This guy led him in a big circle from the front door to the back door. Wasn't this crazy? He didn't want to argue with the crazy person. When he walked into the little building, he saw rows of guards with weapons in their hands. He thought that this Ning Wang was really extravagant. He didn't feel safe even in his own home. He walked up the stairs. The two guards at the door searched him before letting him in. Anxi County Military Officer Li Yi greets His Highness. After walking in, Li Yi first bowed. Scholars only knelt to their parents and the emperor. His Highness was one level lower than the emperor and only needed to bow twice. After bowing, he raised his head and saw the figures in the room. He was slightly startled. Apart from Ning Wang, who he had only seen in the portrait, everyone in the room was familiar. Li Xian, who was frowning at him, looked coldly at his Emingzu, the high-ranking official who had just treated him to a meal in the garden, and the coffin-faced old man standing behind him. Li Yi sighed in his heart. As expected of a high-ranking official, to be able to sit at the same table as Ning Wang, he must at least be a first-rank official. Then he saw the rank 1 official suddenly clutching his chest. His breathing quickened and a pained expression appeared on his face. In the next moment, his entire body stiffly fell to the ground. Imperial Uncle. Imperial Brother. Imperial Father. Your Majesty. The expressions of the people in the room changed at the same time. There were a few panicked voices. The old eunuch named Changda was the fastest. His figure flashed and disappeared in front of them. He caught Emperor Jing before he fell. Come quick, call for the imperial physician. The current emperor was suffering from asthma. No matter where he went, there would be an imperial physician. Even if he hid it from the court officials, It was impossible not to bring an imperial physician. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a response from outside the door. Two figures rushed downstairs. Li Yi, who had been ignored by everyone, stood in the room with a dumbfounded expression. Imperial brother, imperial father, his majesty. This title. The person who had just treated him to a meal in the garden was actually the emperor? Oh no, his majesty has no pulse. The old eunuch put two fingers on Emperor Jing's wrist. His expression changed and he immediately reached out to pinch Emperor Jing's philtrum. Damn, there's no pulse and his heart has stopped. What's the use of pinching his philtrum? Seeing this, Li Yi muttered in his heart. Even someone as steady as Prince Ning had cold sweat on his forehead. If something happened to his imperial brother in Prince Ning's mansion, the court officials would not care if he was Prince Ning. They would probably accuse him of regicide. Seeing the old man pinching with all his might, Li Yi finally couldn't help but walk over and say, "It's useless to pinch like this. Go away." Changde did not care about anything else at this time. He did not even raise his head and said angrily. Li Yi was slightly annoyed, but he thought that the old man was probably anxious at this moment. It was understandable, so he did not care too much. At this moment, Emingzu grabbed his arm. For the first time, an extremely anxious expression appeared on her usually indifferent face. Have a way. She was very clear about Li Yi's various magical methods. The princess consort's stubborn illness was also cured by him. Thinking of this, Emingzu looked at him with eyes full of expectation. Chapter 170. I'm not 100% sure. Li Yi hesitated and looked at her. When he was in primary school, the school would have several first aid classes every year, such as artificial respiration, cardiac compression, simple bandaging, and so on. Of course, at that time, it was limited to the level of science and there was no chance to practice it. Occasionally, he would fantasize that the most beautiful girl in the class would suddenly faint, and then as a boy he could be the hero to save the beauty, openly doing something that was indescribable at that age. However, the person in front of him was not an ordinary person. He was the emperor of a country, the absolute ruler of a feudal society. If something went wrong, even 10 heads would not be enough for him to chop off. Based on today's situation, he might not even have the chance to escape with Rui and the others. But if he didn't do anything and just watched the old man pinch his philtrum, he was afraid that before the imperial doctor arrived, this high-ranking emperor would have already passed away. Even if he didn't deserve to die, he would be strangled to death by the old man. If the emperor died unexpectedly here, no one present would be able to escape. It was a disaster either way. Li Yi couldn't help feeling a little depressed. Why did Prince Ning call him over for no reason? Wasn't this a trap for him? He didn't know whether to save him or not. Just as he was struggling in his heart, the old man also found that pinching the philtrum seemed to be really useless. His Majesty still showed no signs of waking up. Suddenly hearing Princess Yongla's words, he grabbed Li Yi and asked, "Do you have a way to save His Majesty? At least I can hold on until the imperial doctor comes." Li Yi nodded and could only bite the bullet. After all, he was a good youth who had developed morally, intellectually, physically, and aesthetically. It was better than this old man messing around here. Hurry up and save him. If anything happens to His Majesty, be careful of your life. Thinking of what the prince had said just now, that the princess's stubborn illness was also cured by him, the old man gritted his teeth and looked at Li Yi sinisterly. "Then you should do it." Li Yi immediately took a step back. If he couldn't save His Majesty, he would be wronged. "You." The old man looked at him with fire in his eyes. Just as he said one word, a stern voice came. "Chief Steward Chong." Emingzu stopped Changde, then turned to look at Li Yi and said, "Hurry up and make your move. No matter what the result is, I will pardon you." Li Yi thought to himself that the daughter of the old Li family was indeed reasonable. At this time, Steward Chong had already stepped aside. Earlier, he had already digested a number of first aid manuals in his mind. He felt the emperor's left chest, which was still in a coma. Just now the old man had said that there was no pulse. As expected, it was a cardiac arrest. Li Yi immediately clenched his right hand into a fist and punched the emperor's chest a few times. "Impudent." Seeing this, the old man's face changed. He immediately bent his palm into a claw and grabbed at Li Yi's shoulder with a whistling sound. With such a heavy blow to His Majesty's chest, could it be that he was not trying to save His Majesty, but was trying to kill His Majesty? At this critical moment, a white shadow suddenly flew across the air. Immorse kicked the old man's hand away and said coldly, "Chief Steward Chong, I know you are eager to save His Majesty, but if you continue to obstruct me, it will only delay father's treatment." Hearing this, a look of hesitation appeared on the old man's face. He could not make a move on the princess. When he looked down again, the young man had already crossed his hands and was pressing on His Majesty's chest. Although this was still a strange method that he had never heard of, it was at least acceptable to him compared to what he had done just now. Without a defibrillator, Li Yi could only use this more direct and violent method to help the heart beat. Next was conventional chest compressions. There was no epinephrine, no glucose solution, no nicotinamide, Loblin and dexamethasone, which he had never even heard of before. Naturally, he could only use this simplified first aid method. During bare-handed CPR, artificial respiration and chest compressions were carried out in a certain ratio. Next was the project that Li Yi had been looking forward to the most since he was a child. However, looking at the face of the Jing Kingdom's emperor, the corner of Li Yi's mouth could not help but twitch. He could not do it no matter how hard he tried. His Majesty has a pulse. When Li Yi was doing chest compressions, the old man's hand had been on Jing Di's wrist. At a certain moment, a hint of joy suddenly appeared on his face and he blurted out. As soon as this was said, everyone in the room breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing his magic again, Immorse looked at Li Yi with an extraordinary splendor in her eyes. Even Prince Ning wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and a little gratitude appeared on his face. If something happened to His Majesty here, Prince Ning Mansion could not escape the blame. "I need someone to help me." In the end, Li Yi could not overcome the hurdle in his heart and raised his head to say this. "I'll do it." Hearing this, the old man immediately said without hesitation, "Tilt His Majesty's head back, pinch His Majesty's nose, and blow air into His Majesty's mouth." Li Yi tried to make his meaning easy for others to understand. "That's called dragon head, dragon nose." The old man glared at him and said, "Why do you have to do this?" Pinching His Majesty's nose and blowing air into His Majesty's mouth. This was already a great disrespect to His Majesty. In order to carry out the gas exchange between the gaps to ensure that the blood provided in the artificial circulation process has enough oxygen. Looking at the old man's dumbfounded face, Li Yi said impatiently, "Do you understand? Whether you understand or not, just do it." Although Li Yi's attitude was not good, the old man was not annoyed at all. His Majesty's pulse had begun to beat, which showed that his method was effective. At this moment he did not care about whether he had offended His Majesty or not. He recalled what the young man had just said, walked to the front and leaned over to put his old face, lift His Majesty's dragon chin, pinch the dragon nose tightly. Yes, that's it. Continue, don't stop. Li Yi could already feel that the emperor's heart had begun to beat. The time for CPR was not long, about 2 to 3 minutes. The brain's tolerance time for hypoxia was 4 to 6 minutes. Even if the emperor woke up after this time, there would be varying degrees of damage. The tolerance time for other tissues was a little longer. Based on this, after this high-ranking emperor woke up, he should not have any dementia or paralysis. After about 10 minutes or so, although the emperor had not woken up, his breathing had returned to normal, and his heart had begun to beat steadily. Only then did Li Yi ask the old man to stop. Seeing that the old man stood up without a red face and was not panting, Li Yi was also surprised. This old man was not bad. After blowing for so long, he actually did not feel dizzy. His lung capacity was too unbelievable. This old man was reckless just now. "I hope you don't take it to heart, little brother." After feeling His Majesty's pulse, the old man was finally relieved. His face had also begun to become ruddy. He knelt on one knee and said to Li Yi with a fist and palm salute. Forget it, forget it." Li Yi could also understand him. He waved his hand and supported the old man a few times with both hands. Only then did the old man stand up. What's wrong with this emperor?" A weak voice came. Prince Ning and the old man immediately stepped forward and helped Emperor Jing up. Sitting on the chair, Emperor Jing was just about to speak when he suddenly touched the top of his lips and could not help but let out a soft hiss. Why does it hurt so much here? Li Yi thought in his heart. That old man just pinched so hard, it would be strange if it did not hurt. This old servant deserves to die. The old man surnamed Chong knelt on the ground with a thud. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.